A very good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. On today's show, there's breaking news as we come on air. The latest inflation figures being published as we speak.
And the White House sounding more and more like the Kremlin. Donald Trump blames Ukraine for starting the war with Russia.
It's Wednesday, the 19th of February. Your headlines. Donald Trump delivers another blow to Ukraine after excluding them from talks with Russia.
Today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Ukraine's President Zelensky is expected to hold his own news conference in Kyiv an hour from now. We'll bring it to you live. Also ahead, retailers who sell knives to under 18s could face up to 2 years in jail. We'll hear from the government in the next few minutes. Rescuers trying to save more than 150 whales stranded on a remote beach in Australia are defeated by bad weather. Tributes to the drummer who helped create the sound of one of Britain's most iconic bands, The Jam's Rick Buckler dies, aged 69. A very good Wednesday morning to you. As you can see, Gurpreet has joined Mari and I on set here because the CPI inflation data has just crossed. And Gurpreet, we were expecting it to tick up. It's ticked up more than expected.
More than expected. We were expecting it to come in at 2.8% for January, but it's come in at 3%, so higher than we were expecting and up from 2.5% in December. Crucially, above the Bank of England's 2% target. It was already worried about what to do with inflation, considering that the economic outlook isn't looking great. And all of this suggests that we just can't get complacent on inflation. More specifically, the Bank of England can't get complacent on inflation. But it is in a bit of a tight spot because, as I said, although inflation is above target and it's expected to go even further above target, the Bank of England sees it hitting 3.3% later in the year on the back of rising energy bills. The economy is struggling. Although we had a bit of a surprise on GDP recently, it's very much stagnating, and that means the Bank of England's in a bit of a bind, because on the one hand you would expect interest rates to stay high to bring inflation down to target, but that also risks sucking even more steam out of the economy. And at the moment the Bank of England is trying to weigh those two up, and in fact we had two rate setters recently who voted for a chunky 0.25 percentage point cut in interest rates to try and shore up the economy. But all of this is a reminder of the inflationary risks that do persist in the economy. One of the big ones is wage growth. Recently, we had data on wage growth, which showed us that wages are rising at their fastest pace in 3 years in real terms towards the end of the year. The fear is higher wages drive up inflation even higher. So all of this is stuff that the Bank of England's going to have to now weigh up.
Yeah, and just to remind some of the key numbers that crossed in this, it was 2.5% in December. It was expected to rise to 2.8%, but went to 3%. That is CPI. If we just dwell on a couple of the subsectors of that, core CPI, when you strip out energy and food, was 3.7%. That is as expected. And service inflation, which is often focused on as an important and sticky subsector inflation, was 5%. That's risen from 4.4% in December. Some had expected it to rise a little bit more. Gurpreet, it speaks, as you were saying, to the extent to which inflation is sticky, it doesn't go away quickly, and it is in fact rising for this month at least. Just remind us where the Bank of England is, because they cut rates at the start of the month from 4.75 to 4.5%. We hadn't expected a cut again as soon as next month. So there's probably no change, at least to the market expectations around that.
Yeah, market expectations. So this is investors in the financial markets. They place bets on where they think the Bank of England's going to go. They're very much of the view that the bank's not going to cut interest rates on the back of some of that weak economic data we've been seeing. In fact, 74% said the bank's not going to cut interest rates. And now we've had this inflation data, 3% above target. We'll have to see how the markets move, but it's very unlikely now that the bank is going to move on that.
Yeah, so unlikely to get another cut, certainly in the short term. Mari, we talked about this earlier. Is it a political headache? Is it a bad headline? It's 1 month's data, and we're not talking about a return to the huge levels from a couple of years ago. And importantly, as Gurpreet was saying, wage growth is higher, so people should at least not be feeling the pinch too much. But it does start with a 3. We cut at straws on this, but that is, a significant step up again, away from the bank's target of 2%.
I think it is. And I think politically, again, when it comes to the politics of this, it's about how things look and it's about how people feel. And so I think that 3% number, first of all, is just so much further from that target than we were before. Also, let's not forget that when Labour were in opposition, the amount of times inflation figures would come out, and when it was creeping up, even when it was back under control, and it was creeping up, they would be the first out there to say, look at what the Conservatives are doing, this is their fault, they've lost control of the economy. And now they are obviously in power, they're starting to realise that actually this stuff is really tricky and you will be blamed for it, even if you believe it's not your fault or there are external factors that are affecting it, for instance. And so I think Rachel Reeves now has a job where, as Gurpreet was pointing out, the GDP figures were a bit of a pleasant surprise. The unemployment figures not ticking up yesterday would have been a nice little bonus, as it were. But now things are going in a different direction. And so I think, politically speaking, Rachel Reeves is going to be looking at those numbers and thinking, OK, I need to change the optics on this.
We're going to be hearing from the government a little bit later, Dame Diana Johnson, in 10 minutes. We've also just got a statement from Rachel Reeves saying, getting more money in people's pockets is my #1 mission. Since the election, we've seen a year-on-year wage after inflation's growing at their fastest rate. But I know that millions of families are still struggling. That's why we're going further and faster to deliver economic growth by taking on the blockers to get Britain building again, and goes on to say, aiming to secure well-paid jobs and get more pounds in the pockets. That statement could have been written yesterday or a month ago.
Probably was.
Probably was. Nothing that actually relates to the new data, other than the fact that we learnt yesterday, not today, as we mentioned, that wage growth is higher than inflation. So in terms of those people in those jobs, they are getting a real increase in their wages, even though this inflation has picked up. Guys, we have to leave it there. We're going to talk more about inflation. Simon French will be joining us later. As I said, the government, Dame Diana Johnson, joining us in about 10 minutes. Gurpreet, Mari, thank you so much for now. Now, in an extraordinary news conference in Florida, Donald Trump has falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. He also defended his decision to exclude President Zelensky from peace talks and hinted that Ukraine needed a new leader by calling for elections. Our US correspondent Mark Stone sets out this report from Mar-a-Lago.
It was from his Florida resort, not the Oval Office, that the president issued his latest broadside against Ukraine.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
It is stunning language from an American president that has left Ukraine and Europe's leaders reeling. They knew things would be different in this Trump presidency, but this is altogether different. Blunt, direct, and against every one of their principles. The words followed this meeting in another gilded palace on the other side of the world, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. America and Russia around a table. Pariahs to partners, it seems, and a switch so fast that it's left every other Western nation genuinely alarmed, not to mention left out. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, opposite his American counterpart, Marco Rubio. The meeting said to be positive, upbeat, and constructive.
The goal is to bring an end to this conflict in a way that's fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties involved. What that looks like, well, that's what the ongoing engagement is going to be all about.
But for Europe, if this was to be a genuine attempt to find a lasting, fair peace, they would be here, and so too would Zelensky. Instead, it was Russia issuing the demands.
We explained today that the presence of troops from NATO countries, but under a foreign flag, under the flag of the European Union or under national flags, it doesn't change anything in this regard. This is, of course, unacceptable to us.
And here's what baffles and alarms Western leaders. Look at what Marco Rubio said about Putin just 3 years ago. Many in the West still don't understand that Putin is an expert liar, he said. If in fact there is a ceasefire, it's because he sees some strategic or tactical benefit. And this, Putin still wants to capture Kyiv and install a puppet government. European governments want a peace deal, but they want to be in the room, and they want America to have their back. But President Trump's diplomacy is transactional, and it will bring him here later today to Miami and a speech to a Saudi-run conference. On the face of it, the conference is all about investment, the president's desire to get Saudi Arabia to invest $1 trillion in the United States. But every time the president speaks, it is free-flowing. With every word, he is upending norms, sending friends, allies of America, into existential tailspins. From Riyadh to Florida, it is in the unlikeliest of places that the world order seems to be shifting so fast and so fundamentally. Mark Stone, Sky News in Miami.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is holding a press conference this morning. It's expected at around 8 a.m. We'll bring it to you live. And an hour later, we're likely to hear from Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who's addressing the country's Duma. We'll bring you the key highlights of that, too. Now, in some domestic news, the mother of Alice da Silva Aguiar, one of the 3 young girls killed in the Southport attack, has praised her local community in her first interview since her daughter was murdered. Molly is here to tell us more about, Molly, some of the key takeaways in this understandably emotional interview.
Yeah, that's right. You can only imagine what her parents are going through. Barely 7 months on, she was their only child when she was murdered last year in Southport, just 9 years old. And what you get from this interview is really, I think, a sense of who she is and what her mother, Alex, wants her to be remembered by. She paints a picture of a little girl who was very committed to dancing. She said that she was 16 months old when she started baby ballet, and by 4 years old, she went to Southport's dance academy. On Tuesdays, she went to the choir. On Thursdays, she went to cheerleading. So she was clearly musical and really loved to dance. I'll read you a little extract from the interview. She said, her mother, Alex, in the weekends, we would spend time together. We would go to friends' houses, go out for meals. We were always happy to be us 3. We had everything. So what else could we ask for? Now, Alex also talked about how Southport is now home. Her mother was from Portugal originally, but she said the community have really rallied round the parents since her little girl was killed last year. There's a fundraising event on Saturday, and friends as well describing Alice as being happy and so funny, liking parties. Mother's saying that people have been extremely kind, and she said we as parents didn't expect that, but we now feel at home in Southport and they want to stay there.
And there is because we had some interviews a week or 2 ago from some of the other parents of those victims, and there is a great sense of community coming together.
Yeah, that's right. They were quite clear in the same way that they talked about their children in the same way, but also being very clear. They felt quite unified in their message. They were very upset about the sentencing being televised. They felt quite strongly that they wanted to put across in their own words what their children were and how they want to be remembered, and the community is a big part of that.
Molly, as always, thanks so much. Now, in just a few minutes, we'll be hearing from the Policing Minister, Dame Diana Johnson, and, of course, expect those sorts of topics to be coming up. Let's have a look now at some of the day's other top stories. The Vatican says the Pope has pneumonia in both of his lungs. Pope Francis was admitted to hospital in Rome on Friday. The 88-year-old's condition is said to be complex. The rapper A$AP Rocky has been found not guilty of firing a gun at his former friend. The 36-year-old was charged with 2 felony counts of assault that carried up to 24 years in prison. KFC is leaving Kentucky and moving its corporate headquarters to Texas. The move takes the fast food chain away from the state that is its namesake and where it was founded in the 1930s. A massive sinkhole in Surrey has forced a number of residents to evacuate from their homes. Surrey County Council declared a major incident after the 20-metre-long hole opened up and exposed wires and cables on Monday night.
$250,000 for the Maybach truck. Double R with the factory rims. I got the 90, the years, the versions, the bribes, I'm really a threat. It's got to the point that I don't even care.
And Central C, Darku and Bashir among the big names that won awards at the Mobos this year. Central C was named Best Male Act and is now the joint most decorated rapper in Mobos history, along with Stormzy. Tributes have been paid to the Jam drummer Rick Buckler, who died at the age of 69. His death was announced by former bandmates Paul Weller and Bruce Foxton. The Jam had 18 consecutive UK top 40 singles over their decade together. Now, the government has announced a study into the long-term health effects of vaping on young people. The £62 million study will be done over 10 years and tracks 100,000 individuals. Our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, is here now. Ashish, good morning to you.
Good morning.
See, I have to say, when I was reading about this, I thought, why only now? And then I saw that this is going to take 10 years.
Yeah, the trouble with vaping is it's relatively new. The focus has always been on trying to get people to stop smoking, because we know smoking eventually, ultimately kills you. So vaping was suggested as a way of breaking the smoking habit, and largely successful. It is less harmful than smoking. So it was used as an alternative for adults to stop smoking, and has been quite successful in that. But the problem with vaping is we simply don't know enough about vaping. There isn't any long-term study on the impacts of vaping, especially on young people. And while smoking has been in decline, and we are probably in the next 3 years going to have the first smoke-free generation because of the government's tough legislation on smoking, vaping has skyrocketed, especially among teenagers. So a quarter of all teenagers, 11 to 15-year-olds, have used an e-cigarette or have tried vaping. So while they continue to push back on smoking, vaping continues to rise. And we don't know enough about the dangers of vaping. That's the issue here.
Well, I do come back to the same point. I don't see why this sort of study couldn't have started 5 or more years ago. I think we've known young people have been taking up vaping at an alarming rate for a while. So I stand by that question. I guess the other point on the timing is, isn't the government bill already proceeding at this point? So it's sort of, again, it seems to be an odd time to carry out a study when you're already passing legislation.
You are passing legislation, and that's on the tobacco and vaping bill. So that's looking at tobacco and smoking. There is already legislation in place to tackle vaping. That's vaping targeting especially teenagers with bright, fancy packaging, the flavouring and everything else. So that is going through Parliament as we speak. But you need long-term studies to know what sort of damage is happening to children. You couldn't have had a 10-year study 10 years ago, because at the time vaping was just being introduced, people were taking up the habit. And at the time, largely, people would have thought, OK, if this stops people from smoking, it's got to be a good thing. So you have short-term studies, but you need the long-term studies to really understand the impact it's having on those young lungs and young bodies between the ages of 11 and 18. So you need the long study, and it needs money, which £62 million, and you'll have this long-term study with 100,000 youngsters, young adults, and then you'll be able to identify exactly what is happening to those bodies through vaping, and then you can make public health messaging and public health you can enforce public health messaging through knowing because you have the evidence.
Ashish, as always, thanks so much. Let's have a look at some of the stories that have dominated the front pages today before we speak to the government. The Telegraph says the price of a peace deal in Ukraine could be the ousting of President Zelensky if he's forced to hold new elections. We expect to hear from him at 8 a.m. We'll bring you that live. The Guardian says that once a deal is sealed, Russia and the US will work together to explore what it calls economic opportunities. And the FT goes with the story in a different way, saying the new relationship between America and Russia as the path to a rapid ending of the war. Let's bring in the government. Dame Diana Johnson, Minister of State for Policing, Fire and Crime Prevention, joins me. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
One story that didn't make the front pages, because it crossed moments ago, was the inflation data. And it's risen and risen fairly significantly to 3%, up from 2.5% in December. Is that a bit of a headache?
Well, the figures have just come out, and I think the Bank of England yesterday said it was going to be a bumpy ride. So that figure going up clearly shows there is a bump in the road. As I understand it, this is to do with some of the problems around energy prices and global gas prices. So I think, I'm going to say to you that we've only been in power 7 months. We've had 14 years of economic stagnation. So I think there's obviously work that's underway with the Chancellor. But I also know that the IMF and the OECD are saying that we're going to have the fastest growing economy in Europe. So a bump in the road, and I think the Bank of England have recognised that yesterday.
We will see what the GDP growth numbers end up being at the end of the year. The Bank of England did just downgrade their forecast, but that's all right. We'll move on now to the announcement that you're making today and the sort of changes you want to see brought out to try and clamp down on knife crime. Just sum it up for us, if you can.
Well, we've recognised for some time when we were in opposition that more needed to be done about the online sales of knives. Commander Clayman, who's the national lead for policing on knife crime, has done this review for us to look at where the problems are. And also, I just want to pay tribute to the Kanda family because they have campaigned for justice for their son Ronan, who was so horrifically killed with a ninja sword just yards from where he lived, just after he'd finished his GCSEs, age 16. And what came out in that case was the perpetrators, who were also 16, had been able to go online and buy a 20-inch ninja sword. They'd been able to use the identity of one of the parents and the bank card of one of the parents. And one of those individuals had also been able to buy 25 deadly weapons online. So there's clearly an issue there. And when, on the day of the attack, the perpetrator went to the post office to collect the sword, marked up with what was in the box, no checks were carried out. Now, clearly there are problems, and what we want to do in this package of measures coming from Commander Clayman's report is that we want to call it Ronan's Law in memory of Ronan and that horrific case. And it has a whole series of things we want to do. We want to, first of all, say there should be reporting of bulk and suspicious purchases online. We think that's important. We want to increase the penalty if sales are made to under 18s from 2 years, from 6 months to 2 years. We want to look at whether we should have a licensing scheme for those retailers online who sell knives. We want to set up a new unit for policing to be able to start to look at what is going on and to collect that evidence and to take in those reports of bulk and suspicious activities. So there's a whole range of measures there we think would be helpful. We also know that age verification isn't working, so we're going to introduce more stringent controls on that, providing information like a driving licence or a passport. And when the knife or the bladed item is delivered, it has to be checked against that form of ID. So there's a whole range of things that we think are important to introduce.
It sounds like these measures are very much focused on purchases of brand new knives, particularly purchases online. What portion of knife crime does that account for versus acquiring knives that already exist, as it were, that are already in circulation? I mean, is this going to solve the problem of crime itself, or is it just going to stop a few? I mean, I can't really imagine buying a knife online myself. Is it a high proportion of the cause?
Well, I think what we know is that there isn't one thing you can do to stop knife crime. There's going to have to be a whole range of things. And one of the issues that we haven't talked about is prevention and stopping particularly young people getting involved in knife crime in the first place. So we have a whole piece of work around prevention partnerships to identify young people who might be at risk of getting involved in knife crime and putting in the support and help and the protective measures to stop them moving into knife crime. So there's a whole range of things you need to do. We need to ban, we absolutely need to ban, and we've already introduced the ban on zombie knives. We're going to introduce the ban on ninja swords. We've got to make sure that when people are carrying knives, there are penalties. And one of the things we've said is that any young person caught with a knife, there are too many who are then just, nothing really happens to them. We want to make sure there's a mandatory referral into a youth offending team and a plan of action how to deal with that young person. So there's a whole range of things here that we need to do. You ask about particularly new knives and what involvement that has in knife crime. I mean, we all know, don't we, that knives are readily available in the home, in the kitchen drawer, but we also know that those status knives, like zombie knives and ninja swords, are being used, particularly with organised gangs, particularly in county lines, to threaten, to make people feel intimidated, because they are big, big knives, machetes and swords. So we have to deal with that, and that's why we're introducing bans.
One aspect you mentioned, increasing the punishment from 6 months to 2 years to selling knives to people of a young age. to what extent did you have to weigh that up against the prisons crisis that we face at the moment, where a lot of the advice is to shorten sentences?
Well, obviously, we inherited a mess in the prison system, and the Lord Chancellor has had to take some really dramatic action to deal with what we inherited. There is a plan, of course, to build 14,000 new prison places by 2031. But I'm not going to shy away, and I don't think the government wants to shy away from the fact that where people are engaged in criminal activity and need to be taken off our streets, then they will go to prison. I think we've got to be really firm about this. And, you know, in the disorder in the summer, when we saw people being sentenced, provision was made to make sure that those people could be sent to prison. So there are plans afoot. There's more money going into the court system than for many, many years to ensure that cases can proceed quickly, or quicker, I should say. But there is a commitment. We will deal with people who are committing crimes, and we will give them the appropriate sentences.
Just finally, I wanted to ask for your view on the latest that we've been hearing about the Nottingham attacker, Valdo Calacane. There's an article in The Sun today that outlines 11 ways in which the families, the victims, were failed by the police specifically, but also by authorities more broadly. Their spokesperson is joining us in an hour to discuss that. Do you feel they were repeatedly and extensively failed?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that our thoughts really need to be with the families who have gone through this most horrific crime. I would also say that, as I understand it, this is a leaked report. I've not seen it. I don't know what's in it. I know you're saying it's being reported in the media. The Prime Minister last week met with the families. There is the commitment that we will have a public inquiry, judge-led. I think that's the appropriate way to get the answers for what happened in this particular case. But it was an appalling attack. And as I said at the beginning, I think my thoughts are really with the families and making sure that they get the answers to the questions that they still have through that public inquiry.
On that note, will the report, particularly the IOPC report, be published in full, or will we only get a summary?
The IOPC, that's obviously independent of government. They will produce their report in whatever format that they feel is appropriate. I'm not party to that discussion either, so I'm not really able to comment on that. Perhaps it would be better to speak to the IOPC about their plans. Okay. Dame
Diana Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated, as always. We've got a little bit of an update on the Pope's health coming from the Vatican. They're saying that Pope Francis had a peaceful night in hospital and ate breakfast. The 88-year-old was admitted to hospital in Rome on Friday. He has pneumonia in both lungs, but that slightly more positive update coming from the Vatican just moments ago. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll hear what campaigners make of the government's latest efforts to restrict knife sales to teenagers, having just heard, of course, the government's arguments. Plus, Musk on a mission, why the tech billionaire is slashing thousands of jobs across the US, and the award-winning play about former England boss Gareth Southgate coming to a theatre near you, going on a national tour. We'll speak to its creator.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope, because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight?
Off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history in Talbot.
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the revenge porn helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. A reminder of our top stories this morning. Inflation has risen sharply from 2.5% to 3%, above market expectations. Speaking on this programme, Government Minister Dame Diana Johnson described it as a bump in the road. US President Donald Trump has falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. He also defended his decision to exclude Ukraine from peace talks. The mother of Alice da Silva Aguiar, one of the 3 young girls killed in the Southport attack, has praised her local community in her first interview since her daughter was murdered. And retailers will soon be legally required to report suspicious knife purchases to police. It's part of new laws designed to tackle young people's access to weapons. And let's get more on that last story, the government's efforts to tackle knife crime. Ministers are introducing stricter rules for retailers after police pointed out that it's easier to buy a blade than paracetamol. I'm joined now by John Yates, Chief Executive of the Youth Endowment Fund, a charity that aims to prevent young people becoming involved in violence, and Gideon Boabeng, a former gang member and victim of knife crime, and the founder of Our Pain to Power. A very good morning to you both. Thanks so much for joining us. John, if I can just start with you in terms of the extent to which, when knife crime is committed, it does come from these new purchases of knives, brand new knives, particularly online, which seems to be one of the areas of focus of these new rules being announced today.
Yeah, so I really welcome what the government's doing, and I think most people will. Why should it be possible for people to sell huge bulk numbers of knives to under 18s without consequences? I mean, I think most of us think you shouldn't be able to walk into a shop and buy huge amounts of aspirin. You know, there should be some rules in place. So, you know, 1 cheer at least for the government is a good thing to do. Why not 2 cheers? I think because when you look at how many people die from knives, about 50% of those knives come from the place we all have in our house, which is the kitchen. And so it's right to try and get rid of big bulk sales of knives, but we know it's often just normal knives that get picked up and used too. So yes, this is good. It's not bad, it's good, but we just need to not be naive about this, that there still are things out there that will cause violence. So we've got to do something about the other end of that blade, which is the person carrying the knife.
And on that note, Gideon, just before we get into the sort of motivation, I guess, for carrying a knife, if you could you give us a little bit of background on yourself as to why I mentioned in the intro that you were nearly killed from knife crime yourself and your background?
Yeah, for me, I was aged 21 in Leicester doing my degree. Nothing to do with gangs or anything like that. Around the wrong friends, and I got caught up in a fight that led me to being stabbed 14 times. And the people that stabbed me weren't in a gang either. So I think that shows us that it's not just gangs, it's young people. Anyone can hold a knife, and it's the reason why they're holding the knife. That's the issue.
Obviously, since then, you founded Our Pain to Power. What through your work in this area and your experience that you just described, have you concluded is one of the main drivers, potentially the main addressable drivers for why people purchase these knives?
I think there's a few reasons. Out of fear, protection, it's become sort of a trend, you know. You see the things you see on social media, people having zombie knives, and you're like, well, if I don't have one, someone might stab me, so I want to get one myself. And people are just, to me, lost. There's not enough direction and people there to support them, so they result to the wrong things.
John, do you think a big portion of people that carry knives that we're trying to address are buying them for defensive reasons, not offensive?
Yeah, I do think that. When you survey, for example, most knives are not carried by teenage children, let's be clear, but when you survey teenage children about carrying knives, about half of them will say the reason they've done it is that they're afraid. It's actually, Gideon puts his finger on it, they're worried someone's going to attack them. There are other reasons too. You know, sometimes people will carry a knife because they want to steal something. People do use these knives functionally, and sometimes they want to matter in the world. That's why what Gideon says is so important. All of us want to matter. Like, why are we here so early in the morning? We could be lying in bed because we want to do something that matters in the world. Why would you turn to violence? Because you feel that everything else is falling apart. You're not succeeding at school. Perhaps you've been excluded from school. Things are not working out at home. Perhaps you've already run away a couple of times. You're not fitting in well socially. Things are not working out. We all long to be respected, and a weapon can give us some respect. So what do we do about it? We need to give young people role models. That's why what Gideon does is so brilliant. The evidence that the Youth Endowment Fund, the charity I lead, points to, says young people need mentors. They need sometimes access to therapy, and they need police in the right place that they can trust at the right time. But it's good the government's doing this. They've got to also put money into prevention, and they're about to go through a big piece of budgeting over the next 6 months. The big challenge for them is, will they keep putting money into prevention?
And Gideon, specifically on what John has been addressing, you founded Our Pain to Power, and you're trying to address this particular point with it.
Yeah.
What sort of stuff do you do, and what's really been the learning curve?
For us, is the one-to-one mentorship, meeting a young person where they're at. We'll address their needs where they're at, we'll address their family as well. What I've seen is, for the young people that we support, probably about 8% of them don't start right. And what I mean by that is the family home, the environment home. We start looking at those issues, and then we will definitely see a drop in youth violence in general. Because if we take away the knives, it'll be something else violence, it'll be baseball violence, it'll be whatever. Is why are our children traumatised, hurt and in fear?
What would you, Gideon, like to see from the government on this? Because this sounds like something that is, you're suggesting at least part of it, is people's homes. It's a family issue maybe. So what is the step that could be done from Westminster, from the centre?
Families need support. So it looks like, for me, having mentors for young people, children, from ages of 7 in schools, supporting them with their mental health, their emotions, looking at things that haven't been addressed at their homes, that sort of support, putting a fund in for that. Preventative measures. The knife, putting the laws in the knife is amazing, is great, but why do young people have the knives? Let's address that.
Mm-hmm. John, one sort of area that kind of links some of these gaps is obviously schools. Is there more that can be done there that you'd like to see specifically from the government?
Yeah, I really would. So the government's talking a very good game, for example, on attendance, and saying we need to do something to get children back into school. I'd really plead for this government to say they're going to care about the children who are particularly absent 50% or more of the time. It's rather easy to go for the low-hanging fruit. There are children who miss school because of holidays, because the parents are maybe working at home and their kid's a little bit sick. That's great. What we need is the children who have really vanished from the school roll, particularly children who've been excluded. I really want the government to have a target to get children who've been excluded and at some of the most challenging schools that look after them attending. Those children, excluded children, there's presently no target to get those children back into school and regularly attending. Who are the children who are most likely to carry a knife? It's children who've been excluded. So we've got to get a bit more joined up. It's great that the minister's here talking for the Home Office. I would love to see the Education Secretary saying we're going to do something to get children who've been excluded back into school.
Gideon, as we start to wrap up, I mean, John sort of framed it earlier as one cheer for the government, but not 2 cheers. Is that the sort of sentiment you get? Is this a good, positive step? Are we heading in the right direction, but there's lots further to go? Or how would you frame it?
Yeah, same as John. It's great that it's been put in place, but again, it doesn't address the root causes of the why. And until we start looking at that and putting support money into the why, then we're going to keep being in a year or two speaking about why young people keep trying to stab each other to death or kill each other.
Gideon, John, thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, thousands of jobs across the United States have been cut by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. The tech billionaire was tasked with drastically overhauling the government by President Trump last month. And since then, he's been on a job-slashing spree across the country's civil service. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has this report.
National parks like Yosemite in California are often considered the crown jewels of America. Millions of people visit here from around the world. But beauty offers no protection from brutal, sweeping job cuts. Workers, including park rangers, locksmiths, even emergency medical staff, fired by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency.
I received a termination notice on Friday at 4:22 p.m.
Olek was fired from his job cleaning park facilities, including the toilets.
Why am I a target? I don't make that much money. I make around $40,000 a year. Like, why me? Why am I the fat? But I chose to come serve the American people and the international community because I truly believe that our national parks are truly one of America's best ideas.
What would you say to President Trump, to Elon Musk, if you could?
I'd like to tell him, come look at my bathrooms and tell me if I'm essential or not.
National park workers are the latest to come into Musk's firing line. His department has already cut 95,000 jobs across government. This is clearly a long way from Washington, D.C., but it's in places like this that the true extent of Elon Musk's move fast and break things approach to national government is being felt. He instituted similar slash and burn cost cutting at his private companies like Tesla. But national parks, some would argue, are a different beast.
It just equates to money, but there is no money that can replace this.
How much will it affect places like this?
A whole lot, right? The ramifications are consequential.
I think that's sort of the discouraging thing, is trying to explain to your kids why the billionaires don't see it. From our perspective as like everyday people, how do you convince people that don't understand
that this matters?
Yeah, that this matters, and that the natural world, that we're interconnected with the natural world, and that we're actually doing ourselves a disservice when we think these green spaces are not a part of our own lives.
President Trump and Elon Musk would say there is a huge amount of inefficiency in government.
It's horrible. Oh, it's so true. And it's been going on for decades. So, yeah, I'm all for what he's doing, what Elon Musk is doing. I'm supportive. You know, we'll see. Agencies like the National Park Service, I think those should be last.
There is seemingly no order to these cuts, and critics would say no rhyme or reason to who stays and who goes. Only the promise that there's more to come. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Yosemite National Park.
More than 150 whales are stranded on a beach off the coast of Tasmania. Conservationists say around 90 of them are still alive, but it's unlikely any can be saved. The difficult ocean conditions and the challenges of getting specialist equipment to the area are complicating their response. Earlier, I spoke with marine scientist Dr. Vanessa Perotta, who shared why whale rescue missions are so difficult.
A lot of people are wondering, why can't you just get the tail and drag them out? Well, they're the size of a car. They're really heavy. They're long. And one of the main reasons these animals don't do very well is because they've never felt their own body weight ever before, because they've had the ultimate water birth. So their weight of their body can crush their organs. And so the reality is some that were able to be assisted were coming back.
We're going to go to a quick break now. I just wanted to remind you at the top of the hour, we are expecting President Zelensky to make a public address, and we're going to bring you that live when it happens. You can scan the QR code on the side of your screen right now to continue to get the latest on that particular story, but we'll bring you it live when it begins around about 8 o'clock. Up next, though, we're going to speak to the writer of a play about Gareth Southgate as it kicks off its UK-wide tour. We'll be right back.
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky Security and Defence Editor. The reality of life under Russian fire.
People don't want to leave, even though help is here to evacuate them. They say they want to sort out their belongings first. It's absolute chaos.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety as Russian drones will be trying to find this position.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I've been covering Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood. Hopes and dreams framed by war.
Conflict in the Middle East is another major focus.
An incredibly dangerous moment.
We saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercept going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful.
With global threats rising, I also explored defence and security in the UK and across NATO.
This US aircraft carrier is operating in European waters in a deliberate show of force.
This is routine training for NATO, but should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real. Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans. The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments took the threat of nuclear attack and global conflict. Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. The Olivier Award-winning play Dear England, which tells the story of Gareth Southgate's career as England manager, is about to kick off its UK-wide tour. It'll be on stage at 16 venues across England, starting later this year. Well, joining us to discuss it is the show's writer, James Graham. James, great to have you with us. Before we get into the interview, we want to play just a little bit of the trailer.
Dear England, I can't possibly hope to speak for an entire country, but I would like to share a few things with you as we begin this journey.
England needs a new story.
I don't think the problem's out there on the pitch. I think it's here.
Pressure getting you all ready, is it?
Some pictures there from its Olivier Award-winning run on the National Theatre. It goes regional around the UK now. James, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us. I mean, it has had this great run already, but for those that don't know about it, tell us quickly in 30 seconds the story and what this play is all about.
Sure. I mean, it's about, I guess, to me, the resurrection of the England football team over the past 10 years. And whatever people think, and everyone has different opinions, of course, about the England football manager's role and his decisions. That's why they call it the impossible job. But whatever you think of Gareth Southgate's project, there's sort of no denying that if you go back 10 years ago to the dark days of 2016, losing to Iceland, always going out of tournaments early, something has shifted, and not just in the results, getting to 2 finals, getting to a semi-final, first time in 25 years, first final in 50 years. To me, what's interesting is what Gareth's done to the psychology, the culture, the mindset, and basically the values of the England football, the men's football team, how they present themselves and how we fans see them. It's been revolutionary. And I find that really inspiring and worthy of sort of a theatrical interrogation.
Is it a football story or is it a human story? Break it down for us.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, football to me is pure theatre, and part of the joy of putting the beautiful game on stage is you get all the spectacle. Like the penalty shootout is like the most intense piece of live theatre I think you can get on any stage in the world. But I think you're right. What seems to move audiences, and I feel so lucky we've had like 200,000 people come and see the show already so far, is I think the personal story. It's Gareth's story and of the young lads around him. But if you think of Gareth Southgate's journey from 1996 and missing that penalty in Wembley and going out the tournament to 20 years later coming back with a certain sense of resilience, having learned those lessons.
Dear England.
He now feels like he's learned. He's gone on a journey, and he was the one who broke that penalty curse 20 years later. I find that really moving, that someone can deal with their struggles and their pain in a really positive way.
Did you know Gareth before you wrote it? Do you know him now?
I mean, don't we all feel like we know Gareth a little bit? I was very lucky that I got to. He invited me up to St George's Park. I got to spend time researching up there. I met his entire team in a very Gareth Southgatean way. The thing he always wanted to impress upon me that he wasn't the centre of the story. It's a whole, it's a whole village that builds a team. What and actually just listening there to Joseph Fiennes read his famous letter, which is the title of the play, Dear England. He presented a different kind of leader. He was very humble, very vulnerable. He was happy to talk with a certain level of emotional intelligence and let people into him and his fears, his doubts, his hopes, his dreams. And in a way, I feel like that was also a shift in the character of the leader of the men's football team. He let us know what it was like, what it felt like. And so I feel genuinely like we all know Gareth Southgate maybe more than we've ever known an England football manager.
Do you think that the topic of this play brings a slightly different audience to the theatre? And is that something that you're hoping for particularly good turnout, I'm sure, as you take it around the country?
Completely. I think if people don't really like football, they still seem to really enjoy the show because of the story, because it is sort of a Shakespearean arc, fall, rise and fall. But it was really, really important to me. I mean, I didn't grow up with theatre in my life. When I was a young lad, when I discovered it changed everything for me. And we got tens of thousands of people into the National and the West End. And it's going back to the National this summer before it hits the road. Tens of thousands of people who'd never seen a play before. And it felt like a slightly different environment in the theatre, just, with lots of teenagers wearing their club football tops, a sort of more relaxed atmosphere. And there are loads of barriers to people accessing culture, aren't there? Some of it's financial, some of it's geographical, a lot of it's in a Gareth Southgate way, a lot of it's psychological. You just don't think it's going to be for you. So it's really important for me that subject matters come to the stage that non-traditional theatre audiences can relate to.
Obviously, the play's already been a huge success, and I think it first came out in 2023. For this tour, I understand you've updated it and added a bit more detail. As much as I agree with your sentiment and I adore Gareth Southgate, and I think he transformed the team and the tone in particular, I guess you must have been hoping for a better real-life 2024 set of factors that you could update the storyline with. It's not the perfect reprieve, alas.
It's not perfect, no. And obviously, when you're writing real life, you have to deal with what cards you're given. As an England fan, of course, and I agree with you, I would have adored winning in Germany, and it felt like all the stars were aligning 60 years after 66. It was on German soil. It just felt right, and I really wanted it for Gareth. I wanted his approach to be validated with a trophy. However, having said that, really horribly, as a dramatist, you always have to accept that the most impactful, illuminating and moving sports stories, if you think of all the great sports films of all time, they are often, sadly, when people don't quite cross the line and get the medal. But they learn something else along the way. And also as a fan, I recognise that it is a journey. Like part of it, what the problem that Gareth identified is that we always want everything immediately, which means we'll never be happy with the journey and enjoy the journey. But we are on our way to winning a trophy quite soon. And I really believe that whoever does that, whether it's Thomas Tuchel or someone else, the tracks that Gareth laid, almost as close as damn it into the station, deserve celebrating and deserve a theatrical analysis. So yeah, I would have, of course, I would have picked the trophy, but
it's a little harsh, James, blaming England fans for wanting something immediately. We have been waiting quite a long time.
I would never do that.
As an Arsenal fan,
I'm one of those fans, and I totally get it. I know. The point of all this stuff is to win a trophy. And Gareth would say all the cultural stuff. The point is still to win a trophy, and I totally agree with that. And fans have the right to expect and demand that. I totally get that.
Yeah. Particularly after waiting since 60 years or however long it's been. Just finally, James, you know him quite well. Do you think he's done with football for good?
Well, that is a good question, isn't it? I mean, he does seem to be pivoting into a different kind of role. He's about to write a new book on leadership. He's obviously very passionate about charity work and about presenting a new model of leadership to young people. So who knows? I'm sure if he was offered something, he would take it. But where do you go from the impossible job, the biggest job in world football? It must be quite hard to imagine where you go from here. But I really think that what he manifests is worthy of another job in football for sure.
James, great stuff. Thanks for joining us. Congrats on the play. Good luck with the tour. James Graham there. Molly, Mari with us here on set. Have you seen this play? Would you see this play?
3 times.
You've seen it 3 times?
I'm such a huge fan. And I'm not
Wow.
a massive football fan, but it was genuinely incredible.
You saw it 3 times?
Times.
All
3
at the
different
National?
sets of people, all at the
That cost you
National.
quite a lot.
Big fan.
Jeez.
Yeah, but worth every moment.
I really wanted to go and see it, and I failed to because I
There's
just
still
sort of never
time.
get round to it. Well, there's still time. Yeah, not in the National. Would you? That's been
Definitely.
quite well sold, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, I would definitely do that.
Yeah.
It sounds absolutely
It
brilliant.
really does. Gareth Southgate. I love that he has cultivated this great story out of an imperfect ending, basically. But anyway, we're out of time. This hour of Sky News Breakfast will be up after this short break with all the day's stories.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, inflation jumps to 3%, its highest in almost a year.
And the White House sounding more and more like the Kremlin. Donald Trump blames Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. We'll hear from the President Zelensky in Kyiv shortly.
It's Wednesday, the 19th of February. Your headlines. Inflation jumps from 2.5% to 3%, above the Bank of England's target and more than the market had expected. Donald Trump delivers another blow to Ukraine after excluding them from talks with Russia.
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Ukraine's President Zelensky is expected to hold his own news conference in Kyiv this hour. We'll bring it to you live. Also ahead, retailers who sell knives to under 18s could face up to 2 years in jail. We'll hear from the government in the next few minutes. And tributes to the drummer who helped create the sound of one of Britain's most iconic bands, the Jam's Rick Buckler, dies aged 69. Very good morning to you. The latest inflation figures have been published and it's up sharply to 3%. That's more than expected. Gurpreet and Mari are here to reflect on the significance of this. Gurpreet, first of all, just break down exactly what numbers crossed this morning.
Yeah, so the inflation rate for January came in at 3%. That was higher than we were expecting. We were expecting it to come in at 2.8%, and it's up from 2.5% the previous month. Question is, how significant is that? How worried should we be about it? Well, some might remember the double-digit inflation that we were seeing a couple of years ago. Obviously, it's nothing like on that scale. But it's worth bearing in mind that when we say inflation's coming down, the price level is still really high. So prices are still about more than 20% higher than they were in 2019. So a lot of people are still really living with the ramifications of the cost of living crisis. And although wages have been going up and a lot of people have been getting very healthy pay rises, averages can sometimes disguise what's going on at the margins. And a lot of people haven't secured those pay rises, and for them, their standard of living has been declining. And then 3%, it's still above the Bank of England's 2% target, which suggests that the Bank of England can't get complacent on inflation. And although there's some talk about this maybe being a hump, that we can get through this inflationary increase and that actually low growth is the biggest thing that we need to be concerned about. We've been here before with the Bank of England when we've talked about inflation being transitory, that it won't persist, and then it has done. So we've got to be careful about it. And the Bank of England is in a bind because on the one hand, as I said, inflation is above target, which would suggest that interest rates would need to stay high to squeeze inflation back down again. But then the economy is really stagnating. Although we had a bit of surprise on GDP, we're in a low growth environment, which suggests that we need to actually lower interest rates to provide some stimulus. So they're the two things that Monetary Policy Committee is weighing up at the moment.
Well, the government last hour, Dame Diana Johnson, described it as a bump in the road. We've just heard from the Conservatives. Let's get their take.
Well, today's figures underline the fact that we are in a different world than we were a few years ago under the previous government, where inflation was routinely double digits. But let's be clear, we know that families across the country are still finding it hard to make ends meet, which is why yesterday's data about real wages increasing their fastest rate in 3 years was so welcome, and why putting more money in people's pockets is at the heart of our plan for change to kickstart economic growth.
And inflation's jumped up more than expected this morning. And combine that with our low growth figures, are we entering a period of stagnation?
Well, the Bank of England's been clear that they expected inflation to be slightly higher in the first half of this year, while still being on target to go down towards its 2% target rate. So we know that the road is going to be bumpy towards getting to that target. The Bank of England has been clear about that, but we're confident in our plan for change to make sure that we're kickstarting economic growth by making the reforms that are necessary to boost economic growth right across the country.
And the government's budget is tight at the moment. Are you going to have to ask departments to make deep cuts in order to increase defence spending?
Well, look, national security is an absolute priority for this government, and we've been very clear that we will do what is necessary to protect our national security. The Chancellor is also very clear at the budget last year that the fiscal envelope has been set and that her fiscal rules are non-negotiable, and we'll always make sure that we take fiscal decisions with responsibility, underpinning that stability in the economy, which is so crucial for investment and growth.
That, of course, was not the Conservatives. It was James Murray, the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury for the government, for Labour. Murray, in terms of what this does mean for the government, it's clearly ongoing pressure. It's clearly a bit of a headache, and it's not a headline starting with a 3, not just an increase somewhere in the 2s, that they won't like. But it comes, I guess, in the midst of some other data points that have been less underwhelming than they could have been.
Yeah, I think as Gurpreet was outlining, it's a bit of a mixed picture. I think the optics of getting up to 3.3% today when it comes to inflation, especially above those predictions, is not going to be the best look. People don't need to panic yet, but nonetheless, they are going to want to do something to try and bring that down. I think also the difficulty for the Labour Party at the moment is they've made lots of promises about turning the economy around, and they keep talking about growth, economic growth, and how that is going to be the priority and the number one way that people's lives will improve, people's pockets will swell, and their quality of lives will get better. And the difficulty will be that actually that promise of growth looks really quite difficult to achieve in a stagnating economy in terms of if you look at the overall picture. And so the pressure is on the government to do something, but the pressure on the government is really to grow the economy, because so many of their promises and their pledges are fundamentally underpinned by their promises on growth. And if they don't achieve those, everything else starts to follow, kind of like a domino effect.
Murray, Gurpreet, thanks so much. Now, in an extraordinary news conference in Florida, Donald Trump has falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. He also defended his decision to exclude President Zelensky from peace talks. By the way, we are expected to hear from Zelensky in any moment now, and we'll go to it live as and when his press conference does begin. But for now, let's hear Mark Stone's report, our US correspondent, on all that we heard from President Trump last night.
It was from his Florida resort, not the Oval Office, that the president issued his latest broadside against Ukraine.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
It is stunning language from an American president that has left Ukraine and Europe's leaders reeling. They knew things would be different in this Trump presidency, but this is altogether different. Blunt, direct, and against every one of their principles. The words followed this meeting in another gilded palace on the other side of the world, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. America and Russia around a table. Pariahs to partners, it seems, and a switch so fast that it's left every other Western nation genuinely alarmed, not to mention left out. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, opposite his American counterpart, Marco Rubio. The meeting said to be positive, upbeat, and constructive.
The goal is to bring an end to this conflict in a way that's fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties involved. What that looks like, well, that's what the ongoing engagement is going to be all about.
But for Europe, if this was to be a genuine attempt to find a lasting, fair peace, they would be here, and so too would Zelensky. Instead, it was Russia issuing the demands.
We explained today that the presence of troops from NATO countries, but under a foreign flag, under the flag of the European Union or under national flags, it doesn't change anything in this regard. This is, of course, unacceptable to us.
And here's what baffles and alarms Western leaders. Look at what Marco Rubio said about Putin just 3 years ago. Many in the West still don't understand that Putin is an expert liar, he said. If in fact there is a ceasefire, it's because he sees some strategic or tactical benefit. And this, Putin still wants to capture Kyiv and install a puppet government. European governments want a peace deal, but they want to be in the room, and they want America to have their back. But President Trump's diplomacy is transactional, and it will bring him here later today to Miami and a speech to a Saudi-run conference. On the face of it, the conference is all about investment, the president's desire to get Saudi Arabia to invest $1 trillion in the United States. But every time the president speaks, it is free-flowing. With every word, he is upending norms, sending friends, allies of America, into existential tailspins. From Riyadh to Florida, it is in the unlikeliest of places that the world order seems to be shifting so fast and so fundamentally. Mark Stone, Sky News, in Miami.
Well, as we mentioned, we are expecting to hear from President Zelensky any moment now, and we will go to that press conference live when it begins. We're also expecting in the next hour or so to hear from Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He's due to address the country's Duma, their parliament there, and again, we will bring you all of the key takeaways from that as and when it does begin. Now, we're due to be talking as well to some other guests on Ukraine, but we'll bring those to you a little bit later on after we've heard from Zelensky live later. Retailers will soon be legally required to report suspicious knife purchases to police as part of new laws designed to tackle young people's access to weapons. It's part of a raft of measures named after 16-year-old Ronan Kanda, who was killed by another teenager who ordered a knife online. Our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter, has this report.
It is far too easy to buy these online, and it's a trade that leaves agony in its wake. Pooja's son Ronan was 16 when he was stabbed to death in a case of mistaken identity meters from their home in Wolverhampton.
He was just walking. They came from behind and they took his life.
It's in his name that the laws will be tightened to stop children buying knives. He was killed just hours after two teenagers had picked up their online order of a machete and a ninja sword. Retailers will now face much stricter rules.
It's scary, isn't it, that our children can access these things so openly. And these people don't care. They don't care what your child is buying or getting stabbed with. They just care about making money.
The police say that it can be harder to buy paracetamol than it is to buy a knife. And these changes aim to impose tough prison sentences on anyone selling knives to under 18s. That could be either the person processing the sale or the chief executive of the company involved. Criminals are also buying knives in bulk and then peddling them for sale on social media. The government insists it has to stop.
We cannot continue with this online free-for-all that makes it too easy with these lethal loopholes of selling knives and dangerous weapons to children. It has to be closed, and that's why we need everyone to act.
It's progress that many bereaved families say is long overdue.
Or these measures was taken years ago, I believe my son would have been here. My last breath is dedicated to Ronan. And I will continue to fight for my son and to make sure that whatever's gone wrong is corrected, is put right. I will die doing that for my son.
It may be Ronan's law, but it's for everyone. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Wolverhampton.
Now, the mother of Alice da Silva Aguiar, one of the three young girls killed in the Southport attack, has praised her local community in her first interview since her daughter was murdered. Molly's here with more on that particular story. Molly, what have we learned from this rare and emotional interview?
Yeah, well, it was just that. You can only imagine what her parents are going through, barely 7 months on since their 9-year-old little girl was murdered at that Taylor Swift-themed dance class last summer. And what you get from this interview is really a sense of who Alice was in her mother's words. And really, she was talking about how she was a fierce dance competitor, how much she loved dancing. We heard about how she was just 16 months old when she started baby ballet, and by 4 years old, she went to Southport's Dance Academy, and throughout the week as well, on Tuesday she went to choir, on Thursday she went to cheerleading, so she was musical and she loved to dance. I'm going to read you a little bit from the interview. Her mother, Alex, said, "In the weekends, we would spend time together. We would go to friends' houses, go out for meals. We were always happy to be just us three. We had everything. So what else could we have asked for?" Now, Alex, her mother, also talked in the interview about how Southport is now home. She was originally from Portugal, but she's really talked about how the community have rallied around them as parents. And she said actually that we didn't expect that. We feel at home, and we don't feel like we have to go back. So pretty extraordinary in itself that she's feeling like she can talk 7 months on since her daughter was killed, but clear that the community has really helped in her grief.
I mean, it's not the first interview, of course, in the last couple of weeks we've had from any of the parents of the victims. sort of a common theme of what they're trying to say?
Yeah, that's right. Well, there certainly is. We heard a couple of weeks ago from Beby's parents and also from Elsie Stankam's parents, and all of them talked about the role of the community. Elsie's parents' family said it's brought light in the darkness, these little moments, and that's what we're constantly looking for right now. And they specifically didn't want to talk about the rioting that followed their daughter's death, and instead have pointed to how the community have really rallied round them in the months after their daughters were killed.
Molly, as always, thanks so much. Let's take a look now at some of the day's other top stories. Well, the Vatican says the Pope had a peaceful night in hospital and ate breakfast this morning. Pope Francis has pneumonia in both of his lungs and has been receiving medical care since Friday. The 88-year-old's condition is said to be complex.
Not guilty.
The rapper A$AP Rocky has been found not guilty of firing a gun at his former friend. The 36-year-old was charged with 2 felony counts of assault that carried up to 24 years in prison. KFC is leaving Kentucky and moving its corporate headquarters to Texas. The move takes the fast food chain away from the state that it is his namesake and where it was founded in the 1930s, though the brand has been known simply as KFC for quite some time. A massive sinkhole in Surrey has forced a number of residents to evacuate from their homes. The Surrey County Council declared a major incident after the 20-metre-long hole opened up and exposed wires and cables on Monday night.
$250,000 for the Maybach truck. Double R with the factory rims. I got the 90, the years, the version, the bribes, I'm really a threat.
Central C, Darku and Bashi are among the big winners at this year's MOBO Awards. Central C was named Best Male Act and is now the joint most decorated rapper in MOBO's history, alongside Stormzy. Tributes have been paid to the Jam drummer Rick Buckler, who's died at the age of 69. His death was announced by former bandmates Paul Weller and Bruce Foxton. The Jam had 18 consecutive UK top 40 singles over their decades together. Now, we are waiting to hear from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. He'll no doubt respond to some of those false statements overnight that Donald Trump mentioned about Ukraine starting the war with Russia. We'll bring you that press conference live as and when it does begin. Well, joining me now from Kyiv, the former Conservative MP Jack Lepresti, who's joined the international arm of the Ukraine army and joins us now from Kyiv. Thanks so much for joining us, Jack. Just first and foremost, give us a breakdown of the last 6 to 9 months. You've decided to travel to Kyiv to join the Ukrainian army.
I've been coming to Ukraine for about 2 years now in various guises, Member of Parliament, working for some charities. And about a year ago, I decided that if I weren't successful in my re-election, I wouldn't be able to continue, obviously, to do what I could for Ukraine in Parliament and in my former constituency. So I'd volunteer and come out and do whatever I could to help. And in the back of my mind, I was pretty certain I'd end up joining the military, which is what I've done.
And what have you been up to since being out there exactly?
Well, my responsibilities are diplomacy, international relations, weapons procurement, and I've done some work with some veterans charities and some other charities based in the UK. We're working out here, so I've been busy.
What do you make of the mood music, including last night, towards Ukraine from the US, and what do, I guess, some of your Ukrainian colleagues, we should now use the word, make of it too?
Well, I mean, I'm here in a personal capacity, not as an official spokesman, but I was just astonished and appalled that this so-called peace talks discussion took place without the Ukrainians being present, without Europeans being present. I think that the Americans have been taken for fools by Vladimir Putin. I don't think he has any interest in peace whatsoever. He's still building up his military. He's upscaled his defense manufacturing, and he's just sitting back letting this all unfold while other people do, his work for him. And I think in the end, he will continue. And if there is a ceasefire, I mean, everybody wants this war to end, of course they do, but you cannot just have peace at any price. And I'm pretty certain that if there is a ceasefire and an unsatisfactory peace, then Vladimir Putin will just wait out and come back again. He'll use it to build up his,
What we're just going to hit pause, Jack, and because we've just heard from the U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg to Ukraine. He's just arrived in Kyiv, near where you are. We're going to listen to what he's had to say on arrival, and perhaps you can stick around for us. Keith Kellogg now.
Good. Well, look, it's good to be back in Kyiv again. To kind of have some wonderful talks with President Zelensky, his staff, and military commanders. You know, it's kind of nice that I'm here just a few days before the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Give us a chance to have some good, substantial talks. We had a chance to see President Zelensky and his team down in Munich. So I think this is going to be a continuation. Looking forward to doing it. And appreciate you all being out here.
General, what would your main message to the President be today?
Well, I think we're going to listen. We understand the need for security guarantees. It was very clear to us the importance of sovereignty of this nation and independence of this nation as well. And we're going to, part of my mission is to sit and listen and say, okay, what are your concerns? Where are we at? So we can go back to the United States, talk to President Trump, and with Secretary Rubio and the rest of the team, and just ensure that we get this one right. You know, this war has been going on now for 3 years, and President Trump's right. It's a war that very candidly, I truly believe would not have started if he was still president. It's an egregious war in the sense of the length of time and the casualties there. And he understands the human suffering. He understands the damage that you see. And I think, you know, we want to see an end to it. I think it'd be good for the region, it'd be good for the world as well, and protect the sovereignty of this great nation.
And how confident are you that you'll be able to get...
I'm always confident.
To get to the negotiating table, how confident are you about that?
I've always remained confident about everything. So thank you.
Thanks, Press.
Thank you.
Let's bring back in Jack Lepresti, former Conservative MP who's in Kyiv and joined the Ukrainian Defence Forces. Jack, thanks for sticking around on us. What do you make of that? The US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg there saying he's there to listen to what Zelensky has to say.
Well, I mean, I couldn't hear it very well, but I didn't hear anything about Ukrainian sovereignty, their right to self-determination, the right to govern themselves, the fact that they're independent and that needs to be protected. And he mentioned, I think, that this war's been going on for nearly 3 years. Well, actually, this war started back in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. So, again, my own private view, I don't think the Americans realise what they're walking into, frankly.
What's your sort of best guess at this stage on what happens? Do you think that a peace deal will materialise and that it will be bad for Ukraine?
Well, on the upside, it's the early stages in these discussions. So, you know, we're hopeful. And as I say, everybody wants this war to end. But what people have to remember is the Ukrainians don't have to accept what's put on the table by the Americans or by Putin and by anybody else. You know, they're a free and sovereign nation, and they've got a right to determine their own future. Now, in the end, they will decide what concessions they will need to make for peace. But I don't hear anything about what Putin has to concede. I don't hear any discussions about the war crimes which his thugs have committed. The fact that he's still targeting civilians in Ukraine. I was in Poltava a couple of weeks ago. There was a missile strike and 14 people died, including 2 children. There doesn't seem to be any mention of that. And the fact that Ukraine is sovereign and free, and it was invaded by another nation, by a dictatorship, an authoritarian regime. You know, there has to be some moral clarity here about what we're up against and what's happening and what the Ukrainian people have had to live with. Yes, in the last 3 years in particular, but back to 2014.
That may well be true, but what would be the reality of a deal being put on the table that the US wants Ukraine to sign? I mean, they might threaten to remove all support from Ukraine if it's not signed. What would that mean?
What has to happen is the European nations have to step up and start investing properly in their own defence capability, in their troop numbers, in their industrial capacity. You know, there's 300 billion tied up in European institutions, which can be used, Russian money, sanctions money, which can be used to upscale and ramp up weapons production in Ukraine and across Europe. I mean, this is Europe's moment. The Ukrainian conflict isn't just about Ukraine. It's about Europe. It's about us in the UK. It's about what sort of war do we want to live in? And the Ukrainians have to be helped. And if the Americans won't do it, then the Europeans must.
On that point of that 300 billion or so euros that is Russia's, but it's in Euronext, one of the European clearinghouses. Do you think that is a solution now, or with the new music that you're hearing from the US, do you think that's going to get returned to Russia?
It's part of the solution. It's part of how we increase the defence and offensive capability of European forces to help Ukraine. So it's part of the solution. And I go back to what I said earlier. The Ukrainians are under no obligation to accept what's put on the table by anybody else. They are an independent nation. They have a democratically elected government and president, and they are a free, sovereign European nation. They've got the right to determine their own future and decide what they accept and how they negotiate. And our country, the UK, is building the national leadership to get Europe on board and get them to ramp up their defence and offensive capability. So we know what happens next. If Putin wins here, he will not stop in Ukraine.
Chandler Pressey, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We have just heard that the press conference from President Zelensky has been pushed back. It's expected now later this morning. And again, we will bring it to you live when it does begin, but it won't be this hour. Sort of coming on The Breakfast Show, the families of the Nottingham attack victims say they were failed by authorities. We'll speak to their spokesperson. Plus, will new restrictions on knife sales curb teenage violence? We'll hear from the National Police Chiefs Council.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news. Historic day here today.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
This is a huge moment.
It's incredible.
Now to California.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you is banned. How is this a fair election?
The cameras are poised, waiting to see what the president might do next.
Thank you. Thank you all.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history in Talbot.
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the revenge porn helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
Will the colder
affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back to the Breakfast Show. A reminder of our top stories this morning. UK inflation is up sharply to 3%, according to figures released just over an hour ago, more than economists had expected, and the highest rate in nearly a year. The US President Donald Trump has falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. He also defended his decision to exclude Ukraine from peace talks. Retailers will soon be legally required to report suspicious knife purchases to police. It's part of new laws designed to tackle young people's access to weapons. The mother of Alice da Silva Aguiar, one of 3 young girls killed in the Southport attack, has praised her local community in her first interview since her daughter was murdered. Now, the Nottingham attack victims' families have said that they were badly failed by the authorities following a report by a police watchdog. Well, joining us now is their spokesperson, Rad Seeger. Rad, thanks so much for joining us. I guess just for some context as to why you're here today and we're discussing this. This is a police report that's not yet been published. Your expectation is it will be published when, but you've seen it and it's being reported on in part by some of the newspapers today.
We believe the plan is for them to publish it over the coming weeks after the police officers who are being dealt with have had their disciplinary hearings. So we expect it to be published in a few weeks.
And you've seen it in full?
The families have had the benefit of seeing it a few months ago. The reason they've not been able to talk about it, Wilf, is because they were forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And the authorities' intention was to keep it absolutely confidential.
In terms of what is being reported by The Sun, at least, I think I'm right in saying a big aspect of what you, on behalf of the families, are pushing for further investigation, more disciplinary action, relates to a moment 5 weeks before the attacks took place, where you feel the police could have intervened and stopped Valdo Kalakane from carrying out the attacks. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So Kalakane was working in a warehouse at East Midlands Airport, and about 5 weeks before he killed the people in Nottingham, he attacked colleagues in this warehouse quite violently. The police were called to that incident. Very junior officers showed up and did not detain him, did not check the police national computer, and had they done that, they would have seen that this man had a violent past. There was a arrest warrant out for him, and they effectively missed the opportunity to take him off the streets. Now, Leicestershire Police, to their credit, have acknowledged that that was a missed opportunity and that they should have detained him. Now, you imagine if you're the families, where on earth do you go with that? And that's why they sort of feel so strongly that that incident in Leicester shouldn't just be swept under the carpet, because the victims will, there's no doubt, should be alive today, and my heart just breaks for the families. Where on earth do you go with that?
It's impossible to answer that question, and you know, everyone's hearts, I think, goes with the families. I guess the question that follows, though, also is Leicestershire Police have charged the 2 officers in question with misconduct. But again, forgive me for adding these caveats. This is going off reporting in the Sun based on this report that hasn't been published, that I haven't had sight of.
So the police watchdog, the IOPC, have done an independent investigation. They have recommended that these officers face misconduct charges, but they've decided it's not gross misconduct, but it's misconduct. So the ultimate sanction that they could face is a final written warning. Now, again, if you imagine the parents, they feel that it's been a very poor investigation, and they want all of us to scrutinize this report so that we can make up our own minds as to whether those officers should be facing stronger proceedings. I mean, it's unimaginable in our society for somebody to be called out to a violent attack where on the system, the person has a previous record of violent assaults, and then they just let him walk away. So we think it's really important that at least this is allowed to come out into the public. The authorities didn't want that. And then good people like yourself and myself, we can scrutinize it and let the public make up their own mind.
Would these details have come out when the report came out?
We believe that they only intended to publish a summary. So again, the best way to, all the families want, they can't bring their loved ones back, is to make sure that this never happens again. And Wilf, you know as well as I do that the only way you can learn lessons is if the details come out in public. When the authorities, when the watchdogs try to do their own investigation, mark their own homework, and then simply bury the report or publish it on some website that you and I would never go and look at, we miss that opportunity to take learning from it. And so this is a real drive. This is about public safety. And the only way that can be done is to bring it out in the public and then let everybody see what actually happened.
Well, I mean, listen, I'm all for transparency, of course. And I mean, it's sort of part of what we do. I guess, again, I just have to add the caveat that I think it's fair for me to say that we don't know that they would have selectively published the report. Unless they told you that explicitly.
That's their practice. Their practice is to not do a media release. Their practice is to publish it on a website. And unless you're into police misconduct, I'm guessing you're not going to visit those websites regularly. I certainly don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I might not, but certainly my great colleagues here would have done. So I guess we could argue about those details. I think either way, we both agree that shining a light on the details is important. And we can state, but move on from the fact that it might or might not have come out in its own accord in due course. What do you think the step forward is on this? What is the change that would make sure it doesn't happen again?
The families have already been granted a statutory judge-led public inquiry, and a lot of that is going to be ventilated then. But the idea that somebody who's got a violent record, who commits a violent assault, can just be allowed to carry on with their day, is just not something that we can tolerate in a free society. So I think what we're hoping for, what the families want, is that right up to the Home Office, this must go, is we look at how we police in this country, and there's just not enough of them. They're overworked, and inevitably then that leads to these disasters, like we saw in June 2023 with these people being killed. And we must take learnings from this. And that's all these families want, is they want to leave a legacy for their loved ones, that these things lead to real and meaningful change.
And they are being unbelievably brave about that and taking such amazing steps. Have they felt like the government has been engaging with them on these points?
Well, if they were here, they would tell you that they've been engaged in the most almighty battle to get all this out in the open. You would think that if your loved ones were murdered in this terrible fashion, that somebody would scoop you up and just help you through the process. They have felt at every stage that they've had to fight for the truth to come out and to get accountability, which is important to all of us in these circumstances, and that proper lessons are learned. So no, sadly, they feel that their basic human rights have been abused right from the start, which is why they've brought people like me in to help them get to where they need to be. I mean, it's just, they feel like they're being abused on top of obviously the worst day that you can never imagine.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Rad, and we thank you for joining us to share the points of view, important points of view, and keep us updated, if you will. Rad Seeger, spokesperson for the Nottingham victims' families. Now, retailers will soon be legally required to report suspicious knife purchases to police as part of the government crackdown on knife crime. These new measures will be called Ronan's Law and are named after 16-year-old Ronan Kander, who was stabbed and killed outside his Wolverhampton home. Earlier, Policing Minister Diana Johnson told us what the government is trying to do to stop knife crime happening in the first place.
I think what we know is that there isn't one thing you can do to stop knife crime. There's going to have to be a whole range of things. And one of the issues that we haven't talked about is prevention and stopping particularly young people getting involved in knife crime in the first place. So we have a whole piece of work around prevention partnerships to identify young people who might be at risk of getting involved in knife crime and putting in the support and help and the protective measures to stop them moving into knife crime.
Let's talk now to Commander Stephen Clayman, the National Police Chiefs Council lead for knife crime. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's your report that has led to some of these government actions that the Minister was talking about this morning. Let's talk through some of these aspects step by step. Knife crime, what portion of it is committed by new knife sales? Do we have that data?
No, we don't. We don't have that data. Part of actually the review recommendations is trying to track that data in a better way. At the moment, the retailers, official sort of online retailers, don't have to give us any information about sales at all. That's part of the problem.
And do you think the government is embracing most of your recommendations as it comes to knife retail?
Yeah, I think so. The recommendations are presented as a whole, some of which that can be sort of enacted quite quickly. Others will need some further consultation, certainly with retailers, because we want to work with retailers to work out how we implement this over time.
And what exactly is the sort of vulnerability aspect of knife retailing?
So I suppose there's two aspects to this in terms of retailing. You have official sort of legitimate retailers who you and I could go online and buy the knives. I could buy a few hundred knives, which has happened. We know there's no obligation on the retailer to let police know. If I buy bulk, if I walked into a supermarket and bought 300 knives, I think a few people would take notice. There's no obligation. The same with any suspicious activity. I can then take those knives, which happens, and then sell them through networks, through my social media, with absolutely no observance of any of the law around age verification. And there's two aspects of this that we need to control.
In terms of your assessment of the scale of knife crime overall, is still the main focus to try and stop people from wanting to acquire a knife in the first place? And is that something that there are easy steps that you recommend to be taken, or is it that age-old, very tough issue to tackle?
Well, it is a tough issue, and I think that the report is around reducing supply, but the point you make is the most important thing is to understand why a young person chooses to carry and use a knife, and that work continues. But it is a complex issue, which will take time to revolve. This report is, in addition to that, it's another step we need to be mindful of.
Talk to me about the sort of so-called grey market. You mentioned that. It's interesting that there is that kind of market for something that's not illegal to purchase, at least in the first place. Is it very developed? Is it extensive? How do you clamp down on it?
Well, it is extensive, and I guess until you start looking at it, you then get an idea of scale. We don't know the true extent, but what I can tell you from sort of 15 or so grey market sellers that police have looked at in the last sort of 18 months, they've sold in excess of 2,000 knives. So it gives you an indication. They're bulk buying, selling through social media, moving people off that platform to a more encrypted platform, and they're just selling. And they are so easy to buy then and circumvent what is already a flawed age verification system, I should add. But and those knives, we know, in some instances have been used in cases of serious violence.
One argument we do see made by some campaigners is to get rid of pointed-ended kitchen knives so that they're rounded on the end. I mean, they still have a sharp side, obviously. Is that something that you're in support of? Do you think that would make a difference?
Well, the evidence, the scientific evidence is you're less likely to suffer a fatal injury from a slash injury than a stabbing injury. So there is science behind it. The challenge is, of course, how and long it will take to change what we use every day. So it's possible. The evidence says it will help in the long term, and it could save a life.
As we sort of sum things up, where do you think we are in this process? Have we already turned a corner on knife crime and such that while we've got an enormously long way to go, statistics and overall numbers will start to improve, or are things still getting worse?
Well, the last official figures do show a 4% increase, so we know it's extremely challenging. We've got to make sure as well that police are recording the data correctly. And when we report on knife crime statistics, that isn't knife crime with injury exclusively, it's all knife crime. So a knife crime could be intimated or threatened but not used. So there is a bit of understanding the context of the data, but there is still a big challenge. What we're trying to do here is just really tackle the supply and accessibility of some of these horrific-looking knives, which are still legal to buy in some instances.
Commander Stephen Clayton, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, Elon Musk on a mission. Why the tech billionaire is slashing thousands of jobs across the United States. We'll be right back.
Conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky Security and Defence Editor.
The reality of life under Russian fire.
People don't want to leave, even though help is here to evacuate them. They say they want to sort out their belongings first. It's absolute chaos.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety, as Russian drones will be trying to find this position.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming. I've been covering Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war.
Conflict in the Middle East is another major focus.
An incredibly dangerous moment.
We saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercept going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful. With global threats rising, I also explored defence and security in the UK and across NATO.
This US aircraft carrier is operating in European waters in a deliberate show of force.
This is routine training for NATO, but should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans.
The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments took the threat of nuclear attack and global conflict. Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Well, thousands of jobs across the United States have been cut by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. The tech billionaire was tasked with drastically overhauling the government by President Trump last month. And since then, he's been on a job-slashing spree across the country's civil service. Our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, has this report.
National parks like Yosemite in California are often considered the crown jewels of America. Millions of people visit here from around the world, but beauty offers no protection from brutal, sweeping job cuts. Workers, including park rangers, locksmiths, even emergency medical staff, fired by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency.
I received a termination notice on Friday at 4:22 p.m.
Oleg was fired from his job cleaning park facilities, including the toilets.
Why am I a target? I don't make that much money. I make around $40,000 a year. Like, why me? Why am I the fat? But I chose to come serve the American people and the international community because I truly believe that our national parks are truly one of America's best ideas.
What would you say to President Trump, to Elon Musk, if you could?
I'd like to tell him, come look at my bathrooms and tell me if I'm essential or not.
National park workers are the latest to come into Musk's firing line. His department has already cut 95,000 jobs across government. This is clearly a long way from Washington, D.C., but it's in places like this that the true extent of Elon Musk's move fast and break things approach to national government is being felt. He instituted similar slash and burn cost cutting at his private companies like Tesla. But national parks, some would argue, are a different beast.
It just equates to money, but there is no money that can replace this.
How much will it affect places like this?
A whole lot, right? The ramifications are consequential. I think that's sort of the discouraging thing, is trying to explain to your kids why the billionaires don't see it. From our perspective as like everyday people, how do you convince people that don't understand
that this matters?
Yeah, that this matters, and that the natural world, that we're interconnected with the natural world, and that we're actually doing ourselves a disservice when we think these green spaces are not a part of our own lives.
President Trump and Elon Musk would say there is a huge amount of inefficiency in government.
It's horrible. Oh, it's so true. And it's been going on for decades. So, yeah, I'm all for what he's doing, what Elon Musk is doing. I'm supportive. You know, we'll see. Agencies like the National Park Service, I think those should be last.
There is seemingly no order to these cuts, and critics would say no rhyme or reason to who stays and who goes. Only the promise that there's more to come. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Yosemite National Park.
The government has announced a study into the long-term health effects of vaping on young people. The £62 million study will be done over 10 years and track 100,000 individuals. Our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, is here now. Ashish, how significant is this step and why now?
Hugely significant because it's a bit of a dilemma for health experts. They've been trying to cut down on the numbers of people smoking. We know smoking is bad for you. We have the empirical evidence. Ultimately, smoking long-term will kill you. So while adults are being weaned off cigarettes, some health authorities have been promoting vaping as a way to stop adults from smoking. But at the same time, there's been an exponential rise in the number of young people who have taken up vaping. Some people who've never smoked before, drawn to vaping, 11 to 15-year-olds. I think a quarter of all 11 to 15-year-olds taking up vaping. We have no long-term research into the damage or potential damage that vaping does to young bodies, young lungs, developing bodies, as they take up vaping and continue as adults becoming hooked onto nicotine. So this is very, very important.
I find it so interesting you say that. I mean, I can see how we don't have the results of a 10-year study of 100,000 people, but surely we have evidence that vaping is not good for you.
Yes.
Even if it's less bad for smoking.
Look, you're inhaling a foreign body into your own system. So there will be concerns, and there have been concerns expressed along the way. But to put out public health messaging, you need the data, you need the evidence. You can't just ban a product because you think it has serious long-term health implications, because then
Can't you ban it from 11 to 15-year-olds?
Well, they shouldn't be having access to vaping anyway. Right? 11 to 15-year-olds, but because it's so easily accessible. So the legislation is in place to make it harder for younger people to access vapes. And anyone under 18 shouldn't be able to access vapes anyway. Disposable vapes will be banned as part of the vaping and tobacco ban. Also, the packaging, which attracts younger people, that's going to change. So there are restrictions around vaping, but this is the evidence being collected over 10 years to see what actual damage vaping does to a young person's body. So the two are in tandem. At the same time, you have legislation to restrict vaping, especially for younger people, and then you carry out...
Which is already in process.
Which is already in process, yes.
Ashish, great stuff. Thanks so much, Ashish Joshi. Now, more than 150 whales are stranded off a beach off the coast of Tasmania. Conservationists say around 90 of them are still alive, but it's unlikely they can be saved. The difficult ocean conditions and the challenges of getting specialist equipment to the area are complicating their response. Earlier, I spoke with the marine scientist, Dr. Vanessa Pirotta, who shared why whale rescue missions are so difficult.
A lot of people are wondering, why can't you just get the tail and drag them out? Well, they're the size of a car. They're really heavy. They're long. And one of the main reasons these animals don't do very well is because they've never felt their own body weight ever before because they've had the ultimate water birth. So their weight of their body can crush their organs. And so the reality is some that were able to be assisted were coming back.
Let's have a look at the weather before the team join us. After the recent cold and mostly dry conditions, the rest of the week looks milder and more unsettled, but it's chilly for much of Britain now with a patchy frost. Rain will spread across eastwards and Northern Ireland and Western Britain. This morning we'll see light and patchy rain. Right, this is some images of the sky being lit up by mysterious lights last night. I haven't seen these pictures yet. Molly and Mari here as well. Guys, have you seen these pictures yet? Do you know what we're looking at here?
It wasn't in St Albans.
Oh, wow.
Apparently this was in this was in St Albans. Someone videoed it in St Albans, which is quite incredible. Berlin as well, Rotterdam. Quite wide-ranging. Not confirmed that it is a comet.
We're wondering if it's a satellite crashing, a comet, something else.
I have to say, I'm always very grateful to these people that wake up at 3:30 in the morning and take these potential moments in history.
Well, it could be us
my
on the
first
way
thought. Yeah,
coming
on
in
this
at about
shift.
3:20. Yeah, we could become presenter turned reporter. Yeah, quite impressive. I mean, it'd be pretty scary if this was anywhere near.
I suppose maybe it wakes them up.
If it's far enough away. Is that?
Yeah, I think if it lands in the ocean, then it's fine. You get the benefit of looking at it without any of the danger. I think obviously if it's landing near you, then that's pretty terrifying.
There was we had Space Kate on the other week to talk about a more worrying one, which is being monitored.
And they're talking about whether they might have to kind of attack it or divert it, as it were, if it does get close.
Engage in tactics last used by Bruce Willis was basically the discussion. We are out of time. That does it for this hour. Sky News Breakfast. Back with all the day's top stories.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Very good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, inflation jumps sharply to 3%, its highest in almost a year.
And the White House sounding more and more like the Kremlin. Donald Trump blames Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. We'll hear from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov this hour.
It's Wednesday, the 19th of February. Your headlines. Inflation jumps from 2.5% to 3% above the Bank of England's target and more than the market had expected. Donald Trump delivers another blow to Ukraine after excluding them from talks with Russia.
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Also ahead, retailers who sell knives to under 18s could face up to 2 years in jail. We'll hear from the government in the next few minutes. Tributes to the drummer who helped create the sound of one of Britain's most iconic bands, the Jam's Rick Buckler, dies aged 69. A very good morning to you. The latest inflation figures have been published and it's up sharply to 3%. That's more than the market, had expected. Gurpreet and Mari are both here to break this down for us. Gurpreet, first of all, just break down exactly what data we got this morning.
Yeah, so the inflation rate for January came in at 3%. As you said, that was above expectations. We were expecting it to rise to 2.8% up from 2.5% the previous month. So the question is, how significant is that? Well, it's above the Bank of England's 2% target. It's likely to continue rising above that target, peaking at 3.7% later in the year. But members of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee and economists are hoping that this is a hump, that inflation will then come back down to target, and that the bigger concern at the moment is weak economic growth, and that the economy is stagnating. If you keep interest rates high for too long, then that risks sucking out even more steam from the economy. So it's a balancing act. It's a bit of a bind that members of the Monetary Policy Committee are in at the moment. Inflation above target, but weak economic growth. So they're trying to fine-tune their response. And what we got from actually two members of the Monetary Policy Committee at the last meeting was them voting for quite a chunky 50 basis point cut to interest rates because they're that concerned about the economy. The data today shouldn't shift their stance on monetary policy too dramatically. We weren't expecting another cut in interest rates next month. We're unlikely to get one now for sure, but we are still expecting two later in the year, particularly when you kind of look further into the inflation release, that there are certain aspects that Bank of England looks really closely at. So services inflation is one of them. That gives us a sense of how domestic underlying pressures are doing. And that didn't come in above target as well. It actually was below target. So, as I said, that shouldn't shift the stance on interest rates too dramatically. But, of course, with all of this stuff, it's a risk.
Mari, is it a big political headache, small headache? How would we reframe it for the government?
Perhaps a kind of a constant minor migraine, let's say.
Minor migraine.
So it's this kind of like this annoying thing that just won't go away. Now, for now, it's not, as Gurpreet was saying, it's not, this huge shocks like we had under the Conservatives. But nonetheless, because it is still quite far from that target, it's this persistent stickiness of inflation that is going to frustrate the government. I mean, let me show you a little bit of the political reaction from these inflation figures. So the Lib Dems, they've said the Chancellor's misguided policies are putting us at risk of a new era of stagflation. We heard that word stagflation a lot under the Conservatives. They talk about how, the Tories plunged us into a cost of living crisis and Labour is essentially making the misery drag on longer and longer. And they say she should reverse her disastrous job tax and secure a better trade deal with the EU. On the other side of the benches, the Conservatives are talking about how it's essentially a mortgage misery that is going to be continually ongoing for millions, and they're directly referencing the lack of interest rate cuts that this is realistically going to instill, as it were. And also they talk about how pay rises, inflation-busting pay rises, as they kind of characterise them, have contributed to the inflation figures. Also, when the ONS released this data, what was really interesting was they also talked about how the increase in VAT on private school fees had a direct impact on prices going up as well. So we can expect that to be weaponised, politically speaking. So for now, it's not incredibly painful for the government, but nonetheless, it's going in the wrong direction. And so the optics and the way this looks in terms of showing them that they can get a grip on the economy and they can really start to bring prices down and improve people's lives, it looks just that little bit further away.
Mari, Gurpreet, thanks so much. Just wanted to mention, by the way, that Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is speaking in the Duma, Russian parliament. If you want to listen to that, you can, if you scan that QR code. We're going to monitor it for you, though, and we'll bring you any key takeaways. It's not just begun, the gathering has, but he's not quite talking yet. But either way, we'll bring you the key headlines as and when they happen. We mentioned earlier that President Zelensky was due to give a press conference this morning. That's still expected, but it's been pushed back. And again, we'll bring it to you when it happens. All made more relevant because of an extraordinary news conference in Florida last night where Donald Trump falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. He also defended his decision to exclude President Zelensky from peace talks and hinted that Ukraine needed a new leader by calling for elections. We expect to hear from both of those sides, both Russia and Ukraine, as just mentioned. But first, let's listen to Mark Stone's report from Mar-a-Lago.
It was from his Florida resort, not the Oval Office, that the president issued his latest broadside against Ukraine.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
It is stunning language from an American president that has left Ukraine and Europe's leaders reeling. They knew things would be different in this Trump presidency, but this is altogether different. Blunt, direct, and against every one of their principles. The words followed this meeting in another gilded palace on the other side of the world, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. America and Russia around a table. Pariahs to partners, it seems, and a switch so fast that it's left every other Western nation genuinely alarmed, not to mention left out. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, opposite his American counterpart, Marco Rubio. The meeting said to be positive, upbeat, and constructive.
The goal is to bring an end to this conflict in a way that's fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties involved. What that looks like, well, that's what the ongoing engagement is going to be all about.
But for Europe, if this was to be a genuine attempt to find a lasting, fair peace, they would be here, and so too would Zelensky. Instead, it was Russia issuing the demands.
We explained today that the presence of troops from NATO countries, but under a foreign flag, under the flag of the European Union or under national flags, it doesn't change anything in this regard. This is, of course, unacceptable to us.
And here's what baffles and alarms Western leaders. Look at what Marco Rubio said about Putin just 3 years ago. Many in the West still don't understand that Putin is an expert liar, he said. If in fact there is a ceasefire, it's because he sees some strategic or tactical benefit. And this, Putin still wants to capture Kyiv and install a puppet government. European governments want a peace deal, but they want to be in the room, and they want America to have their back. But President Trump's diplomacy is transactional, and it will bring him here later today to Miami and a speech to a Saudi-run conference. On the face of it, the conference is all about investment, the president's desire to get Saudi Arabia to invest $1 trillion in the United States. But every time the president speaks, it is free-flowing. With every word, he is upending norms, sending friends, allies of America, into existential tailspins. From Riyadh to Florida, it is in the unlikeliest of places that the world order seems to be shifting so fast and so fundamentally. Mark Stone, Sky News in Miami.
Now, the mother of Alistair Silva Aguiar, one of the 3 young girls killed in the Southport attack, has praised her local community in her first interview since her daughter was murdered. Molly is here with more on this story. And Molly, what jumped out for you in this interview that she gave?
Well, I think you get a sense of, in her mother's own words, who Alice was, what she liked doing. and just how much she loved to dance. Her mother talked on numerous occasions about her being 16 months old and starting baby ballet. By 4, she joined the Southport Dance Academy. On Tuesdays, she went to choir, and on Thursdays, she went to cheerleading. So it was a chance to really, for her mother, paint a picture and remember her how she wanted her to be remembered. You also get a sense of a really tight, close-knit family. We'll read you an extract from the interview. Her mother, Alex, said, "In the weekends, we would spend time together. We'd go to friends' houses, go out for meals. We were always happy to be us 3. We had everything, so what else could we have asked for?" We also got a sense from her about how much the community has really rallied around the parents in this time of grief. 7 months on, you can only imagine what her parents are going through. Alice was an only child, and she talked about how she didn't expect the community to be there in the way that they have been. She said that we feel at home, and that's because she was originally born, Alex, in Portugal and come over to Southport back in 2010. So pretty extraordinary in itself that she feels that she's able to talk about her child's death just 7 months on from what happened in Southport last summer and how important the community have been in her grief.
Molly, thanks so much. Molly Malone. Now, retailers will soon be legally required to report suspicious knife purchases to police as part of new laws designed to tackle young people's access to weapons. It's part of a raft of measures named after 16-year-old Ronan Kanda, who was killed by another teenager who ordered a knife online. Our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter, has this report.
It is far too easy to buy these online, and it's a trade that leaves agony in its wake. Pooja's son Ronan was 16 when he was stabbed to death in a case of mistaken identity metres from their home in Wolverhampton.
He was just walking, they came from behind and they took his life.
It's in his name that the laws will be tightened to stop children buying knives. He was killed just hours after 2 teenagers had picked up their online order of a machete and a ninja sword. Retailers will now face much stricter rules.
It's scary, isn't it, that our children can access these things so openly. And these people don't care. They don't care what your child is buying or getting stabbed with. They just care about making money.
The police say that it can be harder to buy paracetamol than it is to buy a knife. And these changes aim to impose tough prison sentences on anyone selling knives to under 18s. That could be either the person processing the sale or the chief executive of the company involved. Criminals are also buying knives in bulk and then peddling them for sale on social media. The government insists it has to stop.
We cannot continue with this online free-for-all that makes it too easy with these lethal loopholes of selling knives and dangerous weapons to children. It has to be closed, and that's why we need everyone to act.
It's progress that many bereaved families say is long overdue.
Or these measures was taken years ago, I believe my son would have been here. My last breath is dedicated to Ronan. And I will continue to fight for my son and to make sure that whatever's gone wrong is corrected, is put right. I will die doing that for my son.
It may be Ronan's law, but it's for everyone. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Wolverhampton.
Well, earlier we spoke to the Policing Minister, Diana Johnson, about the issues raised in the report. Here's what she had to say.
I think what we know is that there isn't one thing you can do to stop knife crime. There's going to have to be a whole range of things. And one of the issues that we haven't talked about is prevention and stopping particularly young people getting involved in knife crime in the first place. So we have a whole piece of work around prevention partnerships to identify young people who might be at risk of getting involved in knife crime and putting in the support and help and the protective measures to stop them moving into knife crime.
Well, let's take a look now at some of the day's other stories. The Vatican says the Pope had a peaceful night in hospital and ate breakfast this morning. Pope Francis has pneumonia in both his lungs and has been receiving medical care since Friday. The 88-year-old's condition is said to be complex.
Not guilty.
The rapper A$AP Rocky has been found not guilty of firing a gun at his former friend. The 36-year-old was charged with 2 felony counts of assault that carried up to 24 years in prison. KFC is leaving Kentucky and moving its corporate headquarters to Texas. The move takes the fast food chain away from the state that is its namesake and where it was founded in the 1930s. Emma Raducanu was reduced to tears in a second-round defeat to Karolina Muchova in the Dubai Championships. At the start of the third game, in the first set, Raducanu approached the umpire and looked upset before going on to lose in straight sets.
$250,000 for the Maybach truck. Double R with the factory rims. I got the 90, the years, the version, the bribes, I'm really a threat. It's got to the point that I don't even care. I got jewels in the safe that I don't even wear.
And Central C, Darku and Bashi are among the big winners at this year's MOBO Awards. Central C was named Best Male Act and is now the joint most decorated rapper in MOBO's history, alongside Stormzy. Tributes have been paid to the Jam drummer Rick Buckler, who's died at the age of 69. His death was announced by former bandmates Paul Weller and Bruce Foxton. The Jam had 18 consecutive UK top 40 singles over their decades together. Now, the government has announced a study into the long-term health effects of vaping on young people. The £62 million study will be done over 10 years and track 100,000 individuals. Well, our health correspondent Ashish Joshi is here now. Ashish, good to see you again. So tell us about why now and how significant this is.
Why now? Because there are genuine concerns about the long-term implications of vaping, especially on young people. There is a dilemma for health policy experts. While they are encouraging people to stop smoking because we know smoking kills you, and that seems to be getting through to people, fewer and fewer people taking up the habit. More and more young people are taking up vaping, especially between 11 to 15-year-olds, a quarter of whom have tried an e-cigarette. These are people who've never smoked before but are drawn to vaping. We've never had a long-term investigation into the implications of vaping on young bodies, and this will be over 10 years, 100,000 youngsters who were exposed to vaping, and they will be able to collect real empirical data. So this will help formulating health policy. So if you want to ban vaping full stop, you will have the evidence to back that.
Should it have begun sooner?
It should probably have, and I'm sure there are short-term studies into vaping. The dangers of vaping, or at least the concerns around vaping, have existed for a long time. But you simply can't ban a product, or you wouldn't have the weight behind that ban if you said, we think there's something wrong with vaping, so we're going to go ahead and ban it. So you would need that evidence collected over a long period of time. That's why it's taken so long, I suppose, for society to turn around and say, well, smoking is clearly very, very bad for you. Look how long smoking's been around for. So to move against industry, you would have to have that evidence in your corner. But also, I don't think anyone predicted the popularity of vaping, especially among younger children. But maybe the manufacturers of vapes did, because they have certainly targeted youngsters with the packaging, with disposable vapes, making it easily accessible. And while they carry out this long-term research, the government will also put into place safeguards and legislation to make sure producers of vapes can't target children with that packaging, with the flavours. Legal age is 18 for vaping.
Just enforcing that.
Yeah, and we're going to have a smoke-free generation with the vaping and tobacco, the tobacco bans coming in. So 15-year-olds, current 15-year-olds, will never be able to buy cigarettes in their lifetimes. But that's a gradual process. Alongside it, crackdown on vaping as well.
Ashish, thanks so much. So to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, we'll be talking to the former British ambassador to the United States about the Prime Minister's visit to Washington next week, and a sporting treasure on stage. The play all about Gareth Southgate kicks off its national tour.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news. Historic day here today.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
This is a huge moment.
It's incredible.
Now to California.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you is banned. How is this a fair election?
The cameras are poised, waiting to see what the president might do next.
Thank you. Thank you all.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history. Remember Talbot?
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. Let's go live now to Moscow, where Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is addressing the Duma, of course, fresh from returning from Riyadh, where he'd been meeting with his US counterpart, Marco Rubio.
With our neighbors and supporting stability in Greater Eurasia. We are achieving this task on the basis of bilateral relations and using certain structures that we've created and established, CSTO and SCO and so on. And we've got Caspian 5, Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. On the 14th of June last year, the President, speaking at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, established the strategy for establishing Eurasian security. And this structure, to the difference of NATO, will be open to everyone, including Greater Eurasia and also European parts. We believe that everyone has to have an opportunity to make a contribution to the to the peace of that largest part of the world, and also the largest unity that union that unites Latin American countries. In Eurasia, there's no such organization. There's there are many other structures, sub-regional structures, which I have listed, ASEAN, and also unions for Arab countries. All of these countries and continents that are neighboring, that are neighbors in Eurasia, and there's no structure that unites them. We've started this work. We have signed agreements with our neighbors, and we keep developing our relationships to strengthen them to strengthen their relationships with the neighbors. We've got agreements between Russia and Belarus. We've got agreements with a Korean Democratic Republic. So we've got the Organization of for Collective Security, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And we say that the countries of Eurasia are aiming for that cooperation. We have also set a partnership with Iran. In Belarus, we had a conference on Eurasian security. We have prepared a project, Eurasian Charter for Diversity and Security, and this would reflect the new situation in the region. In terms of countries, I mentioned Belarus. Of course, this is our priority as a union state. Security alliance, strong economic ties, and we continue to deepen those relations. They're becoming stronger and stronger. We've got strategic cooperation with China, and our heads of states confirmed that the strength of our relationship with China is unprecedented.
We're going to step off that, but we're going to continue to monitor it. The Russian foreign minister not addressing the issue in Ukraine as currently, but we'll bring you any highlights as and when he does. We're also expecting later this morning to hear from President Zelensky. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. A reminder of our top stories this morning. UK inflation's up sharply to 3%, according to figures released this morning. That's more than economists had expected and is the highest rate in nearly a year. US President Donald Trump has falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. He also defended his decision to exclude Ukraine from peace talks. Retailers will soon be legally required to report suspicious knife purchases to police. It's part of new laws designed to tackle young people's access to weapons. The mother of Alice da Silva Aguiar, one of 3 young girls killed in the Southport attack, has praised her local community in her first interview since her daughter was murdered. Now, Russia's foreign minister is speaking right now in Moscow. We're continuing to monitor that for you. You can scan the QR code on your screen now if you want to listen to it live. We will listen to anything he does have to say of significance about Ukraine. Well, last night, Donald Trump falsely blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. The Prime Minister's set to visit Washington next week, of course, an enormous amount on the agenda for Keir Starmer in that meeting with Donald Trump. Let's talk about all of it. So David Manning, former British ambassador to the US between 2003 and 2007, joins us. He's a director at Gatehouse Advisory Partners. A very good morning to you, Sir David. Thanks for joining us. It's interesting, just before we kind of get to what's on the agenda for Keir Starmer next week, sum up for us how you're taking all of the rhetoric towards Russia and Ukraine from the US in the last week. Has it gone from a little worrying to terribly worrying? Do you think it's just rhetoric and it's all negotiation tactics? How do you frame it?
I think it's gone from a little worrying to very worrying. People before the election were saying that they weren't sure that Trump would actually engage with Putin in this way and that some of it was just election rhetoric. Now we know that he means it. He's going to have a summit with Putin. He's brought him in out of the cold. He has effectively last night blamed the Ukrainians for being invaded and said it's all their fault, so it's blame the victim syndrome. So I think it's very worrying for America's Western partners.
What do we think about the sort of breadth of this US view towards Russia and towards Ukraine? I mean, Marco Rubio is a very interesting case in point. He was a traditional Republican hawk, really, across lots of issues. Hawkish on China, hawkish on Russia. How can that just sort of evaporate towards one country in particular and still exist towards another?
Well, we don't know that it has evaporated entirely. I thought it was interesting, that one shouldn't perhaps read too much into it, that he was saying before his talks with Lavrov that he wanted to see if talks were even possible. That's a different emphasis, anyway, from the message that was coming out of Washington simultaneously, which was taking it for granted that talks would go ahead. I think we have to see how comfortable Marco Rubio is in this role. And I think we also have to see how far there are strains and stresses within Trump's own administration about the foreign policies he's following. At the moment, we have an administration which is obviously dominated by one man, and I suspect his ministers probably are sometimes as surprised as we are by what he says and does. But I think it's too early to be sure how a Rubio-led negotiation will be conducted.
How important is Keir Starmer's trip to see President Trump next week? Do you think he can change his mind on key topics or not?
I think visits to the US by the British Prime Minister are always important. They're certainly important for us in Britain. At the moment, we believe that there's a good relationship. It's obviously very early days. But I see it myself as an opportunity for reconnaissance, if you like, to find out how this new administration is settling down and how far what Trump has said he actually intends to do, how that will impact on us in Britain, whether it's our security interests or our economic and financial interests. Are we going to be hit with tariffs? But also much more widely, is this going to be an administration that we can work with on the basis of shared assumptions, shared values, not identical policies, but certainly policies that are congruent? Or are we in a new world where this is going to be very difficult to do?
I mean, the Prime Minister has an enormous responsibility with this trip, doesn't he? He's the first European leader to go and meet Donald Trump in the White House. To try and rebalance how these peace negotiations might go a little bit more in Ukraine and Europe's favour, that's on him, isn't it?
Well, I think he will certainly want to do that. I doubt whether he sees himself as carrying this burden for Europe, in quotes. Just to come back to your point, you know, Mrs. Meloni in Italy has her own relationship with Donald Trump, and other European leaders will too. And the incoming German Chancellor will want to establish a relationship. And we can't speak for Europe. What we can do is, I think, try to talk to our European partners in working out how to deal with this new situation in which Europe is not at the table at the moment for this negotiation that has begun between Russia and the United States, and try to see whether or not it's possible to persuade Trump and his administration that we should be at the table and that we have real agency as well. There's a slight tendency at the moment to assume the only two people involved in this negotiation are the Russians and the Americans. And certainly that's the sort of mood music in Washington. I think it's important to remember the Europeans have a stake in this, an important stake. A lot of the frozen Russian assets are in Europe. The Ukrainians themselves certainly have a stake. They fought for 3 years for their independence in the face of this unprovoked neo-imperialist aggression. And I think there's also the question about what goes on in Washington. Will the Congress itself acquiesce in this apparent abandonment of the principles which America has upheld since the Second World War?
In terms of the extent to which Trump can be convinced, do you think there is a difference in any president in terms of how malleable they might be in their second term versus their first term, and in particular for Donald Trump?
I think the general feeling in a second term would be that you're dealing with someone you know. They're usually consecutive. So this is a different situation. Trump has been out of office for 4 years and has come back. He strikes me as being in a great hurry. He knows that he's got 4 years, but at the midterm elections, which are 2 years away, he may or may not retain control of Congress. At the moment, narrowly, he does. So I think this is a president who is 78. He's in a hurry. He wants to do all the things he thought he might like to have done first time round and failed to do. And I think he sees himself as somebody who can bestride the stage and get deals done. The question is, what's in those deals?
Just a quick snapshot, because you mentioned it, mentioning the new German Chancellor that we'll have fairly soon. How important are those German elections?
I think they're critical for Europe. I think if you look at what's happening in Europe this year, the need to have strong, coherent leadership from Berlin at a time when so much is focused on European security and at a time when President Macron is in the doldrums is very important. Britain is not in Brussels. It can talk to its partners, but we need a strong leader.
So, David, forgive me for interrupting. Lavrov has just started addressing the issue in Ukraine. Let's listen to that.
To the meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs with the State Secretary, where discussions on state security would be taking place. First of all, as we said yesterday, we first of all need to remove any threats to Russia, which were created by trying to drag Ukraine into NATO. And also, we need to stop actions of Kyiv regime, which are aimed at killing everything that has got to do with Russia, so religion, Russian culture, economic ties, and so on. So the tasks that were set by the presidents are large-scale tasks, and we will continue our endeavors to implement those tasks. And we'll take all measures in order to adapt as quickly as possible to the changing environment, and we'll engage all reserves of our ministry. And we see that we've created a new department, second department, diplomatic department for Africa. We will continue to expand our ties there. Also in Asia and Latin America, we have 3 new embassies, and we are planning to add 7 more embassies.
будет последовательно продолжаться. Утвержденная президентом внешнеполитическая линия особо подчеркнуть заключение.
So, David, obviously we caught a little bit of what he was saying about Ukraine there before moving on to talking about Africa. He said part of the discussions with Marco Rubio was about removing any threats to Russia. He then said, which were created by trying to drag Ukraine into NATO. What do you make of that?
Well, this is standard Russian propaganda. Nobody tried to drag Ukraine into NATO. The reason Ukraine wanted to go into NATO and continues to want to go into NATO is because of the Russian threat. We need to go back to 2014, when Putin launched an unprovoked invasion of eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, and has consistently been trying to nibble away at Ukraine territory ever since. The response to that, of course, was the Ukrainians who, at that point, were not particularly keen to join NATO. They were keen to join the European Union, but not particularly enthusiastic about NATO. They've become very enthusiastic because of the Russian threat.
One thing that we heard Lavrov say yesterday when he was wrapping up his meeting was that no forces, whether they're officially NATO forces or they come under a different flag or banner, EU forces or an EU member country's forces, should be allowed in Ukraine. If that's part of the peace deal, I mean, what are its implications? Do you think that is looking likely at this point?
Well, I think it's much too soon to discuss, who may not be involved on the ground if there's a peace deal. We haven't even got to a ceasefire yet, so I think, it's a long way off. But no, I don't think it's acceptable at all. Again, it is compromising the sovereignty of Ukraine. The Ukrainians ought to be given a deal that they can accept, which guarantees their security. The reason Lavrov and Putin don't want Western forces of any kind in Ukraine is so that Ukraine is easier to bully.
In terms of what the message might be of all of this to China, is it possible to be tough on one country and less tough on the other? What's the message, do you think, to China over the last couple of years?
Well, I think it's a very interesting dynamic, this. What conclusion will the Chinese draw if the United States gives up on defending the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a partner whom it's been supporting for 3 years? What does that mean? Is that a signal, well, we don't care about Taiwan? You want to take Taiwan, you take Taiwan. You want to bully the Philippines, you bully the Philippines. We don't care. We'll carve the world up between us. So I think there's an issue here about exactly what message the Chinese take from this. But to your point, Wilf, what is the message that the Western partners of the United States will take from this? If the United States is seen to be an unreliable partner, they are much more likely to decide to compromise with China and make accommodations with China. And that's not necessarily going to be in America's interests.
Mm-hmm. We're still monitoring Lavrov, obviously, and we will continue to bring you any highlights, particularly as it relates to Ukraine. So, David, the other question I have is just about the rhetoric we've heard in the last couple of days about an economic relationship in particular that the US might want to build with Russia. I mean, is it, if we fast forward 10 years, fair to say that deeper economic ties are a good thing for peace? I mean, we heard about that over Europe in the post-World War II era. Is there something behind that, or is that wishful thinking?
I don't think it's wishful thinking that you want good economic ties and you want to promote trade. I think that's absolutely the case. One of the things that's interesting about the confrontation at the moment, if we can put it like that, between China and the United States, is that their economies are deeply intertwined. That wasn't true in the Cold War. We had very, very limited economic ties with Russia. Now, in theory, if you have close economic ties, it ought to be a way of escaping, if you like, the confrontational relationship. One can only say it doesn't always work out like that. And just because you've got close economic ties, I'm afraid, doesn't mean necessarily you won't have a bad and difficult political relationship.
Mari's joined us on set as well. And Mari, we were talking with Sir David about this trip to Washington next week for Keir Starmer. Do you think he'll see it as representing the interests of Europe? Would he try and frame it that way, or is he going to kind of try and keep a low profile in case it doesn't go his way?
I think to an extent he will see it as an opportunity to do that, to be able to really provide leadership on behalf of Europe, not instead of, but I think to an extent he will want to show that he's the first European leader going over to meet Donald Trump in Washington, and therefore that allows him to kind of throw a little bit of weight around, let's say. We've got Macron holding another summit today with other European leaders and Canada, for instance. So we know that the French also want to be in that leadership role. And I think to an extent it's an opportunity for Starmer to actually be able to have the ear of Donald Trump and perhaps try and allow him to understand a little bit deeper why Europe is so concerned and what the priorities for Europe are. Donald Trump is often talked about as, you know, learning on the job. He learns by listening, and therefore conversations with him can actually be quite pivotal.
So, David, what sort of skill set is required from a Prime Minister travelling to meet President Trump in this particular moment in time?
I think that listening to him and trying to explain what our preoccupations are while at the same time understanding what his are is crucial. And I very much agree that that is what he will be trying to do. I do think you need to bring something to the table with Donald Trump. He's very transactional.
Like a physical gift?
Well, I think, what are we going to say about our defence spending?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's one thing to give leadership, but if you're at the same time equivocating over one of the things that Donald Trump is insisting upon, which is much increased defence spending, and we're not prepared to say what we're going to do, that seems to me to be quite difficult if you say you're going to take the leadership in enforcing a peace deal in Ukraine.
All jokes aside, physical gifts are often brought, aren't they?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, I don't know what they'll take, perhaps golf clubs.
Who would know? What was the nicest thing that Tony Blair gave when you were ambassador to George Bush?
You know, I can't remember now.
Something not very memorable.
It's probably, you know, it's going to be some sort of thing that connects you to the state that perhaps the president came from, or a sport that he's enthusiastic about. It's something like that.
Well, there we go. Golf clubs.
Golf clubs.
So, David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated, as always. Mario will be around, of course, for the rest of the show. Just, well, you can go if you need to. How will today's inflation figures affect your shop? We'll discuss that next.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope, because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News.
There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the Bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history. Remember Talbot?
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. Let's return to our top story. The latest inflation figures have been published and they've risen to 3%, more than the market expected. Let's bring in Darren McCaffrey. Darren, break it down the sort of standout factors for you.
Very good morning to you, Wilf. I think what's really interesting, and by the way, welcome to Wetherspoons in Harrogate, a company that obviously serves not just a lot of beer, but a lot of breakfast, for example, a lot of coffee. I think they're the 5th largest coffee provider in the country. And what's going up is really big staples that they rely on: meat, cereals, eggs. For example, this very Wetherspoons is telling people to supplement their eggs because the cost is going up. Now, in part, that's because of avian flu, but it is a reminder there are lots of different factors on there, Wilf, when it comes to what raises inflation. And I've been talking to Tim Martin, the head of Wetherspoons. You'll see that interview on Business Live a little later, but he is warning that prices are likely to rise for customers, not just because of inflation, but because of tax rises too. So we're going to be looking at how inflation is impacting people here in Harrogate, around the country, at Business Live 11:30. And I know, Wilf, you have had a little pop at me in the past about talking a lot about the price of alcohol. So I decided this time I would take it one further and go to a pub just for you.
Well, I don't think I've been having a pop at you. I celebrate it, and it makes me thirsty, even at this early hour. And I'm glad to see the pub is busy there. I was somewhat disappointed, in fact, that you said it was people eating breakfast. I thought somehow they'd found a way to get past licensing laws, but of course it wouldn't be on camera if that was true. Dan, we look forward to it. Business Live at 11:30. Let's discuss these numbers in a little bit more detail. Simon French from Panmure Liberum joins us. Mari's here as well, of course, for the political clip. Good morning, Simon. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Wilf.
What's the key takeaway for you? Big surprise rise or just a little bit of a surprise?
Well, it was more than markets expected, more than the Bank of England expected. We did actually expect it to go to 3%, but there were some one-off factors that were driving that. Airfares, the normal disinflationary impact in January was smaller because of the December number being, rather more modest. Then there was an impact of VAT on education costs, and then there was the energy price cap. The judgment, and one of the reasons why financial markets have responded in a pretty sanguine way to all of this, is how much of that is signs of persistent inflation. I think the stuff that Darren was talking about around coffee prices, egg prices, that will be the thing that will probably worry the Bank of England more than actually those one-off increases that took us from 2.5% to 3%.
In terms of whether it's going to start a new trend of rising inflation or be a one-off and temporary, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's at the risk of rolling out a cliche this early in the morning. It'll be a year of two halves. The first half of the year, I think we see another increase in the headline rate of inflation coming in April, when the energy price cap is expected to go up again. But then into the second half of the year, once those national insurance increases that are also coming in April are in the rearview mirror, and in the energy market suggesting rather softer prices led by possibilities of a resolution in Ukraine changing the energy market, I think we'll see inflation dropping rather faster in the second half of the year.
And you maintain your call that you will see quite a few rate cuts. The market at the moment is only expecting 2 more this year.
That's right. So we think another one in the first half of the year, but we think more likely we'll up the pace in the second half of the year if those aforementioned pass-through of national insurance increases are not as pronounced as some people in markets are fearing.
So, Maury, in that regard, perhaps this sort of headline-grabbing highest inflation rate for 12 months might not be as damaging for the government as it could have been.
Yeah, I think Rachel Reeves would definitely hope so. She has got a lot on her plate, economically speaking. If we remember and zoom out for a second, the context that we are operating within, which is a huge conversation around defence spending and a huge conversation around possible tax rises and also cutting public sector spending, potentially up to 11%, some departments have been asked to model, for instance. She has got a lot to grapple with. Now, she's been meeting up with senior business business leaders this morning in Downing Street trying to get ideas of ways you can stimulate growth in the economy. And that is because growth is really that thread that she is clinging onto in terms of trying to improve people's living standards. So I think you're right. For now, she could end up with a decent year by the end of it. But at the end of the day, she needs to find a narrative to talk about and to spin in the first half of the year while those prices do potentially go up.
And Simon, just quickly, we're a month away from her spring statement. Really tough job on her hands for that?
Yeah, there's almost certainly no headroom left against what was only £10 billion back in last October. I think spending cuts likely. The degree to which energy markets help her out or become a hindrance will actually determine the overall shape of the OBR forecast. And there's still a few more weeks before they submit their final numbers.
Great stuff, Simon. As always, good to see you. Simon French from Panmure Liberum. We are out of time here on The Breakfast Show. A reminder, though, of that headline bit of data coming out. 3.0%, the CPI figure, a bit higher than expected and up from the month prior at 2.5%. Gareth Barlow's up next with Sky News Today. Stay with us here on Sky.